Hello friends. Around 86% of the people who watch my videos aren't subscribed, and I'd be thrilled if you joined the community by subscribing. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction helps the content reach more people and supports the channel's growth. Thank you all. 2 years ago, I was living on the West Coast with my little brother. Though we usually stayed indoors, we'd sometimes go out with friends for meals or small gatherings, but we didn't often do anything adventurous. After a while, I decided to look up activities to try nearby, and one of the top recommendations was camping. Since we lived close to the Sierra Nevada mountains, I thought it could be a good idea. I mentioned it to my brother, but he didn't seem too thrilled. A few days later, I went out to buy a small tent and some basic supplies, then packed one of my old bags and drove to a nearby trail. Honestly, I didn't have much camping experience, and heading out alone probably wasn't smart. But since I planned to stay just one night, I figured I'd be fine. After about an hour's drive, I arrived at the trailhead. There were no other cars around, and I didn't spot anyone else. I got out, put on my backpack, and headed down the path. The trail was narrow and somewhat overgrown, not exactly a popular spot. I had just picked it from a list I found online and chose it because it didn't seem too long. As I hiked, I quickly realized how rarely this trail was used. Bushes were overgrown and obstructed parts of the path, and in some areas the grass had grown in, making it hard to tell which way was the trail. But after an hour of walking, I finally reached the campsite. It was small and mostly overgrown, just as I'd expected, but something caught my eye: a pile of logs on the far side of the area. When I went over, I noticed pieces of burnt wood blowing around, meaning someone must have used it recently, maybe even the night before. I didn't see any other camping gear, but I couldn't shake the odd feeling it gave me. I went to the other side, put down my stuff, and set up the tent, taking my time since it was still early. Once it was up, I relaxed for a bit, taking in the quiet. I had about an hour before sunset, so I sat on my sleeping bag inside the tent, eating a quick snack. As the sun started to set, I heard a crackling sound, like a fire, nearby. Curious, I unzipped my tent and stepped out, only to find a man sitting across the campsite, near the logs. He looked to be in his late 40s, but with the limited light from the trees, I couldn't see much detail. He was already looking in my direction, so I awkwardly waved. After a moment, he raised his hand in response. I decided to gather a few sticks and made a small fire of my own. Soon, it was fully dark, with only my campfire and his illuminating the campsite. I glanced over occasionally, hoping to see if he had any camping gear, but I never noticed anything else. Just him, sitting by his fire. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, wondering how he had arrived without me noticing. My tent was next to the trail, so I should have heard footsteps unless he came from the other side, which was just woods. I sat outside for at least an hour, maybe two, keeping an eye on him, but he never moved. Eventually, I went inside my tent, trying to convince myself that I was just overthinking and that he was likely just another camper. I lay down, trying to relax, but my mind wouldn't settle. So I lay there, listening to the soft crackle of his fire. It was probably another hour before I heard footsteps slowly approaching my tent. I sat up, listening as the footsteps got closer until I could see his shadow right outside, against the fabric of my tent. My whole body froze as he stood there, unmoving and silent. Then, after a few seconds, his shadow started moving away, and the footsteps faded into the distance. I unzipped the tent and looked out, finding the campsite empty. The man was gone, leaving only the smoldering logs behind. At that point, I hurriedly packed up my gear, stuffing the tent into its bag, even breaking a few poles in my rush. I left without ever seeing him return. What he intended or why he was there, I'll never know. I don't get scared, I told my brother, loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear, as I slammed my car door. He just smirked and held out my jacket like a truce flag, listing all the things he thought should terrify me. Skinwalkers, witches, werewolves, like something straight out of a horror flick. He wanted to make me nervous, to make me give up, but I rolled my eyes, grabbed my jacket and shouted back, "I'm not scared," before pulling out of the driveway. As I drove toward the mountains, their sharp silhouettes against the setting sun looked like massive teeth, ready to swallow me whole. I wish I'd listened to him. It all began a few days back. Depression had stuck to me like a shadow, always there, whispering dark thoughts of stepping into traffic or off a high bridge. I was worn out from battling it. A friend, likely tired of my constant gloom, suggested I try camping alone. "It's peaceful," he said. "The quiet and the open air really help." He recommended several spots, but my eyes were drawn to the most remote one, a place 3 hours on foot from the last campground in the Colorado wilderness. "You sure?" he asked, clearly doubting my choice. I nodded, too worn out to argue. "Just don't go out after dark," he advised. "You may not like what you find." The drive was unexpectedly soothing. The road twisted through the forest, the trees a blur of greens and browns. I decided to leave my phone locked in the car. This was my time to unplug, to find calm away from the constant noise. I'd planned to stay for 5 days, enough time, I hoped, to sort out my head. Estes Park was the last town I passed. I was tempted to stop and get a room, but I pushed on. The park entrance loomed ahead, and I drove in, feeling as though I was stepping into another world. Dusk was settling by then, and I regretted starting my trip so late. The last thing I wanted was to hike in the dark. I found a small parking area with a few tents already set up and decided I'd camp there for the night. Just one night, I told myself. I set up my tent among strangers who soon became temporary friends. We shared food and stories. Their laughter and the kids playing felt so normal, so reassuring. I drifted off wrapped in my sleeping bag, comforted by the sounds of their voices, the crackling fire, and the gentle rustling of the trees. That night was the last true moment of peace I'd get. If I'd known what waited for me in the depths of those woods, I would have turned back right then. But I was too stubborn, too convinced that nothing could scare me. How wrong I was. Waking up in that parking lot felt like the last easy dream I'd have for a while. I packed up, said goodbye to my new friends, and headed deeper into the forest. With each step, my heart grew heavier. It felt like I was leaving everything familiar behind, sinking deeper into a silence that felt unnatural. "It's just trees," I told myself, "just nature." But I couldn't shake the feeling that the trees were watching me, that they were moving with me. Every sound seemed to echo, and the solitude I had wanted now felt overwhelming, stifling. What should have been a 3-hour hike turned into nearly 6. I cursed, sweated, and questioned every choice that had led me there. By the time I found the campsite, the sun was already setting. My hands shook as I hurried to set up my tent, not from cold but from a fear I couldn't name. As darkness swallowed the forest, every sound became sharper, louder. A branch snapping felt like a scene straight out of a horror film. I tried telling myself it was just animals, just the wind, but that thought didn't bring me any comfort. I crawled into my tent, hoping sleep would chase away the creeping dread. But sleep didn't come easily. The night was restless, filled with sounds that seemed purposeful, almost too close. Footsteps circled my tent, and I lay frozen, too scared to breathe loudly. Shadows turned into monsters, and rustling leaves sounded like whispers. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that I just wasn't used to the wild. But then, I heard the unmistakable sound of something brushing against my tent. My heart raced, and all my earlier bravery melted into terror. I felt my isolation sharply. There was no one to help, No one who would hear me scream. I was alone, trapped with whatever lurked just outside my thin tent walls. When dawn finally broke, it felt like a momentary rescue, but relief was brief. The day brought its own set of challenges, its own fears. As night fell again, I knew terror was waiting for me. That second night shattered something in me. Every noise felt like a threat. Every shadow held something dark. I thought solitude would help me, but instead, it was like a mirror, reflecting all my worst fears back at me. I felt as lost within myself as I was in those woods. The darkness wasn't just outside. It was within me, and I had no idea how to escape it. By the third night, I wasn't just scared. I was completely consumed by fear. Sitting in my tent, the darkness around me felt like a living thing, waiting to devour me. My mind filled with every horror story I'd ever heard. Each sound outside a warning that something terrible was coming. The small fire I had managed to keep flickering felt like the last bit of hope left in me. I told myself to be reasonable, that it was just animals or the wind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Then the footsteps returned, this time joined by more. Whispers and faint laughter echoed, mocking my terror. And then, the side of my tent pressed inward, as if something or someone wanted in. My scream was swallowed by the vast forest around me. In a surge of panic, I unzipped the tent and looked outside. What I saw haunts me. A figure that looked like me, but twisted and horrifying, with eyes like empty pits. I ran, the trees around me a blur of shadows, and could hear it behind me, its steps mirroring mine. A grotesque echo of my own fear. The branches seemed to reach for me, trying to drag me back. When I finally collided with something solid, I thought it was over. But it was a man claiming to be a ranger, though he didn't look the part. His uniform was too neat, his shoes too clean for someone in the wild. But at that moment, I didn't care. He was my escape. We drove in silence, his SUV cutting through the night like a lifeline. When we finally stopped, dawn was just peeking over the horizon. He handed me a card with a single number on it. No name, no title, just a lifeline I wasn't sure I'd ever use. After he left, I drove away as quickly as I could, vowing never to return. The wilderness, once a place of peace, now held only terror and unanswered questions. My friends noticed a change in me, but how could I explain? How could I tell anyone I'd been chased by a twisted reflection of myself, or that I'd possibly seen something beyond reality? Sometimes, I look at the card he gave me, wondering if I should call, if I should try to understand. But then I remember the laughter in the dark, those hollow eyes, and I know some things are better left alone. The forest changed me. It showed me fear in its rawest form. Now, every shadow and every whisper of the wind brings me back to that night. I don't know if I'll ever truly escape it. Maybe we carry our own forests inside us, the darkness that calls our name with a voice too close to our own. Sky, it was 3:30 a.m., completely dark and far too early for most to be awake. But there I lay, staring at the ceiling of my bunk in my quarters at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. My alarm had just screamed, seeming far louder in the quiet morning. Today wasn't just another day. It marked the beginning of a 2-week field exercise, which we in the service called the field. Honestly, I was one of the few who didn't dread it. Sure, we'd be cut off from cell phones, bars, and, worst of all, showers. But it was a chance to escape the daily grind and spend time outside, even if it was in the dense training area. Dragging myself out of bed, I managed to get ready fast. Last warm shower for 2 weeks, check. A real breakfast instead of mess hall food, double check. Living in the barracks had its perks, and a short walk to muster was one of them. When I reached the gathering area, a group of my fellow soldiers was already there, looking as excited as kids on their way to the dentist. Some were practically asleep standing up. Others chugged energy drinks. I felt old around them, even though I was only in my mid-20s. Most of them weren't even of drinking age yet, but that never stopped them. We lined up to collect our gear and weapons. I felt a bit sorry for the ones saddled with the M240s. Those things were beasts. Soon, though, we were all equipped and ready. Our leader gave a quick briefing on what to expect. Follow the vehicle in front, watch for anything suspicious, and cover our assigned areas. Nothing I hadn't heard before. By some luck, I ended up driving the lead Humvee with our leader in the passenger seat, giving directions like he was born to do it. The drive to the training site took about an hour, bringing us to a secluded, wooded area, our home for the next couple of weeks. Setting up camp took hours, but by the end, it felt like we'd achieved something real. Tents were up, a guard schedule was set, and I drew the short straw for the 3 a.m. shift. Just my luck. Standing guard in the dead of night, I tried out the night vision goggles, NVGs, handed to me by the previous guard. The woods lit up in a green glow, and for a moment I felt peaceful. That is, until I spotted 2 privates sneaking away together. I let it slide, we were all adults, but the peace didn't last. As the hours dragged on, I fought to stay awake, until something at the edge of the trees caught my attention. A figure stood there, watching. It was too far away to see clearly, but the way it seemed to look back at me gave me the chills. My wristwatch alarm suddenly went off, nearly making my heart stop, and when I looked again, the figure was gone. I tried to brush it off as my mind playing tricks, but a feeling of being watched lingered. Reluctantly, I finished my shift and woke the next guard, then settled in the back of my Humvee, hoping I wouldn't see it again. The next morning, feeling like I'd only gotten a few minutes of sleep, sunlight began to pierce through the trees. I tried to push last night's encounter out of my mind, chalking it up to fatigue. Today's focus was on land navigation, something I actually enjoyed, especially without lieutenants messing with maps, giving us a real shot at finding our way. After a quick breakfast, we grouped into 3s, received our coordinates, and headed into the woods. Under the thick canopy, morning light turned dim, casting a strange twilight feel. Each step into the untouched terrain felt like entering a new world. We kept an eye out for anything dangerous, snakes included, along with our waypoints. After a few successful stops, reaching one specific coordinate felt off. In the middle of nowhere, we found a lone cone with a photo of a young soldier taped to it. None of us knew who he was or why his picture was here. I took a photo with my phone, thinking it might make sense later. As the day went on, shadows grew longer, and we knew we had to head back before nightfall turned the forest into an even trickier maze. I made a joke about not wanting to stay out there all night, but the mood shifted when Kion, one of my teammates, mentioned he thought we were being followed. We stopped to listen, hearing footsteps in the brush behind us that halted whenever we stopped. Real fear crept in. Was it someone messing with us, or something else? We decided not to run, fearing it might provoke whatever was out there if it wasn't human. Every rustling sound put us on edge. I thought of those horror movies where you scream at the characters to make smart choices. Now I was one of those characters, and there didn't seem to be any safe options. About a mile from camp, something finally made its move. A shadow darted across our path so quickly I barely caught a glimpse, but I saw enough. Eyes glinting in the light, clearly not human. The forest erupted with more glowing eyes, watching us from the dark. Diaz, another teammate, aimed his flashlight at a tree, and we saw one of those figures clinging to it, with a twisted smile on its face. Panic took over, and a gunshot rang out as we bolted, not caring about noise or direction, just wanting to escape. The run back was a blur. My lungs burned, my gear felt heavy, and the forest seemed to close in. We weren't soldiers anymore, we were prey. I fired my weapon, hearing screams that didn't sound quite human. Somehow, I made it back alone, breathless, and with no sign of Diaz or Kion. The sight of my fellow soldiers staring at me, bloodied and frantic, made it clear. They thought I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. The morning light offered no comfort. I was covered in blood, with no sign of Diaz or Kion. Camp was in chaos, everyone looking at me with horror and mistrust. I tried to explain about the creatures, but my words tumbled out incoherently, like trying to describe a nightmare while still inside it. Before I could gather my thoughts, they restrained me. My platoon leader questioned me, anger and fear in his eyes, demanding to know what happened to the others. I tried to warn him about what was out there, but it only made things worse. I was left tied up, knowing I was the only one who truly understood the danger. Hours passed as I sat there, a mess of fear and dread. As another search party went out, despite my warnings, there was nothing I could do. When the leader returned, his expression said it all: the radio static, the lack of response, the distant gunfire. It was happening again. They cut me loose, not out of trust, but necessity. The camp was under attack, and everyone was needed. I grabbed a pair of night vision goggles and looked out into the night, where the creatures closed in. Crawling to a Humvee, I started it up, hoping to escape. The engine roared to life, and for a moment I thought I might make it. But then, tapping on the window, one of them was there, grinning with a mouth smeared in blood. I floored the gas, desperate to leave. When I finally returned to base, instead of relief, I was met with suspicion, thrown into confinement to explain the nightmare I just survived. Only after an investigation that somehow supported parts of my story was I released. They medically discharged me, gave me a pension, and sent me far from Camp Lejeune and the woods that hid things no one should ever face. I moved far away, hoping to forget, but on certain nights, I still see those eyes, hear the tapping, and feel the fear. It might be over, but a part of me knows those woods keep their secrets well. Just a week or two back, I set out on a long walk through the thick woods outside the small town where I lived. It was a tight-knit place with under 1,000 people, quite a ways from any major city. The woods on the outskirts were mostly flat, no mountains or hills, though there were a few ponds and small streams winding through. I was heading to one of these streams. I'd been there a handful of times before, but never stayed overnight until this time. I remembered from past trips that it was nearly a 3-hour trek, almost directly north. Walking between the trees, it was eerily quiet, aside from birds and small creatures moving around in the leaves. There were no other people or hikers, which I had expected since this wasn't even a real trail, just open forest. But as I was about 45 minutes from the stream, I unexpectedly crossed paths with someone. We were both walking towards each other, and it seemed like neither of us noticed until we were just a few feet apart, only a few trees between us. I know I had a puzzled, almost uneasy look, finding it strange to bump into someone so deep off trail in these woods. But the man seemed to have the same expression. I was about to break the silence and say something, but then his face shifted to a slightly nervous smile, and he turned to walk off to the side. I followed his lead and kept walking as well, but once I'd gone a bit farther, I glanced back. The man was no longer walking, but was nearly jogging away without a word. Seeing him run off like that made the whole encounter even stranger. It was almost as if he didn't want to be noticed, or he wasn't too bothered by the odd chance that we'd crossed paths. Whatever the reason, I kept to myself and continued toward the stream. There was no official campsite at the spot, so I found the flattest patch of ground I could, dropped my pack, and set up my tent. With the sun starting to set, I got a fire going. I tossed in random sticks and dry wood nearby to keep it burning for a couple of hours. My plan was to stay up until the stars appeared so I could do some stargazing. Away from town, The night sky often revealed a clear view of the Milky Way, a sight I never wanted to miss. Time went by while I sat there waiting, until a distinct sound broke through the quiet around me. Slow, careful footsteps in the dark woods behind me. I turned to look but couldn't see much in the dim light. As I glanced around, the steps stopped, making it clear that, while I couldn't see them, they could see me. I reached down and grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, shining it toward the trees. The beam stretched out pretty far, and I scanned the area carefully, but there was no sign of anyone. My pulse picked up a bit as I felt that familiar uneasy feeling again. I called out, "Anyone out there?" Another moment passed in silence, not even a hint of another step. After weighing my options, I decided to walk toward where I thought the sound had come from. Maybe it was nothing, but I needed to be sure. I moved carefully, keeping the flashlight pointed straight ahead as I stepped through the woods. I scanned the trees one by one, shifting the light back and forth, until suddenly the beam caught a large figure. It was the man I had run into earlier, standing about 20 feet away. Even with the flashlight on him, he stayed motionless. Acting quickly, I tried not to react and kept moving the light across the woods, hoping he'd think I hadn't noticed him. Then I calmly turned and walked back to my tent, acting as unfazed as I could manage. I picked up my pack, glanced around one last time, then hurriedly left my tent and campfire behind as I started moving along the riverside. Once I'd made some distance, I broke into a run, putting as much space as possible between me and that man. Eventually, I found a spot to rest and stayed awake until dawn. I don't think he followed, as I made it out without any sign of him. I have no idea why he was there or why he'd stayed near my campsite, but I've never gone back to collect my tent, afraid of what I might find if I did. I've always felt drawn to the untamed beauty of nature, the kind of vast, wild places that feel separate from our everyday lives. There's something about the unrefined, untouched landscape that calls out to me, a call I can't ignore. My girlfriend shares this connection. It's an invisible thread that brings us back to the wilderness, again and again. One misty Friday evening, with a free weekend and no obligations ahead, she suggested camping. The idea sparked something in me, a desire to leave the routines of everyday life behind. We picked a forest about an hour's hike from our town, a place we hadn't been but heard was a hiker's dream. Without a car, we set off on foot, our path gradually taking us from familiar terrain to a more isolated, untouched landscape. The hike, stretching nearly 3 hours, challenged us but deepened our connection to both each other and the world around us. As we reached the forest, the sun dipped low, casting warm shades of gold across the sky, a beautiful welcome to what felt like a haven from our usual lives. We walked along, surrounded by silence, talking easily, lost in the calmness of the surroundings. But soon my girlfriend, always more sensitive to the small details around us, mentioned seeing something in the trees, a shadow watching from the woods. I tried to see what she did, but only saw thick bushes and shadows. I brushed it off as her imagination, thinking it was just her nerves. We found a clearing, almost as if the forest itself had set this spot aside for us. With fallen trees forming a rough square, it seemed like the perfect place to set up camp, secluded and beautiful. We pitched our tent, making ourselves comfortable in our little spot, and as night fell, we lit a fire, its glow pushing back the darkness around us. We talked about strange topics, sharing mysteries and odd tales as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the trees. By the time we decided to sleep, the stars covered the sky, and the forest felt wrapped in peaceful silence. As I started to drift off, I felt a strong sense of calm, like everything in the world was right. I had no idea that the forest around us held secrets, and that our sanctuary was less safe than it seemed. In the deep silence, with only a faint glow left from the fire, the night started to take on a life of its own. My girlfriend's voice cut through the quiet, soft and uneasy, saying she needed to step outside. Her tone held something I rarely heard, a hint of vulnerability. "Are you okay?" I asked, feeling a spike of worry. She answered, "Yeah, I'm fine." But her voice was shaky. She stepped outside, her shadow framed by the faint light, and as she zipped the tent shut, a chill crept over me. Minutes passed, stretching longer and longer. The usual night sounds carried on, unaware of my growing worry. 10 minutes went by, then 15, then 20. It was too long. I called out, but only the rustling leaves and distant sounds replied. Panic took over, and I grabbed my flashlight, pushing my way into the darkness. I heard a faint sound, almost like a whimper, leading me further into the woods, away from the safety of our campsite. Then I saw her, and the flashlight dropped from my hands as its beam revealed a nightmare. She was suspended from a tree, her body marred by something unthinkable. Her last words to me, whispered with love and an urgent warning, were about staying away from a cave. And then she was gone. The mention of the cave ignited a mix of dread and curiosity in me. Driven by the need to understand, I pushed forward, drawn toward a dark gap in the earth. What I found there was like something out of a nightmare, a creature twisted and grotesque, something that shouldn't exist. It spoke to me, mocking me for failing her, for not listening to her fears. I couldn't stay. I couldn't bear to look at it any longer or to face the truth of what I had ignored. I ran, stumbling through the darkness, the creature's laughter chasing me. The escape was a blur of fear and desperation, every shadow hiding potential danger, every sound a warning. Somehow I made it back to the road, running on pure instinct. I hitchhiked back, telling my story in a panicked rush to a stranger who showed no disbelief, only a deep, uneasy understanding. Back in town, the reality hit me hard. She was gone. My partner in adventure, taken by something I could barely comprehend. I shared my story with anyone who would listen, from the police to friends. Most were horrified, some skeptical, but a few seemed to believe me. Legends circulated about that forest, stories of a creature lurking in the shadows, waiting for those who wandered too far. What once seemed like myths now felt like warnings we had failed to heed. Days turned into weeks, and then months, but the terror of that night stayed with me. I barely slept, haunted by memories that replayed the moment I closed my eyes. In the darkness, I'd sometimes see it, the creature's outline, lurking at the edges of my vision, drawing closer each night. The guilt gnawed at me. If I had just believed her, maybe things would have been different. That forest, once a place of peace and beauty, now reminded me of the thin line that separates us from the unknown dangers of the wild. I had sought escape there, only to return with nightmares that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching, waiting for another chance. We had answered the call of the wilderness, not knowing that some calls are best left unanswered. There's not much to do in my town. Without the internet, I'd probably be stuck hanging around at the local diner, desperate to pass the time. I have endless entertainment and information right at my fingertips, but I still don't have answers about what happened last summer. I'm more of an indoors type, but somehow my friend Nate convinced me to join a camping trip with his older cousin and my childhood friend. We'd all grown up together, though Nate's cousin was 3 years older than us, so we never really connected. I didn't dislike him, we just didn't have much in common. My closest friend, Amber, was the prettiest girl in the whole area, and I think she knew it. I'd loved her since we were 12, but I'd never told her. I knew that if I did, things would change between us, and I was afraid she'd either turn me down or, worse, say yes. So, staying just friends was fine by me. The only way they got me outside was by having Amber join. I think Nate and Tim figured that out, so when I initially said no to the trip, they invited her along and told me she'd be there. It annoyed me how easily they manipulated me. It was a warm day, and by the time we arrived at the site, we were already drenched in sweat. "Can we set up the tents later?" Nate asked, dropping his bags in the dirt. "No way," I said. "If we don't do it now, we won't get to it at all." I remembered their last trip when they'd been too lazy to set up the tents, opting to sleep outside in their sleeping bags. They'd come home covered in bug bites, and I wasn't about to let that happen again. They groaned but listened, so Amber and I worked on one tent while the cousins tackled the other. "There are only 2 tents," I noticed. "We've shared before," Amber replied without looking up. If she had, she'd have seen how red my face turned. I could at least blame the sun for my flushed cheeks. Just then, Nate decided to throw a water bottle at Tim but missed, hitting me instead. I went over to wrestle with them a bit, while Amber watched, her arms crossed and a smile on her face. As I got back up from the scuffle, I saw a flash of white between the trees. I was about to say something, but it disappeared so quickly that I thought I might have imagined it. Once we'd set up everything, tents ready, food stored to keep animals away, and firewood stacked, we headed down the path to the lake, eager for a swim. Nate and Tim walked ahead while I helped Amber navigate the rough pathway. "Should we really be out here?" she asked, her voice loud enough for Nate to hear. "Wasn't there a big search recently?" Nate cut in, explaining that a few campers had wandered off after taking something strong and were never found. "That was 3 weeks ago. I doubt we'll bump into any lost campers," he shrugged. It seemed a bit callous, but he had a point. 3 weeks in this heat wasn't a good sign for anyone's survival. Still, I couldn't shake a slight chill despite the hot day. "Just to be safe, let's not wander off alone tonight," I suggested. "Oh, you just want an excuse to follow us everywhere?" Nate joked. "Maybe he likes watching us. You know," Tim added with a smirk. Odd how quickly that came to mind, almost as if it's what you were thinking about, I replied, rolling my eyes. Amber giggled at us, and I wondered why she put up with the 3 of us. The lake was cooler than the air, but it still wasn't as refreshing as I'd hoped. I almost wished I was back home with the AC on, but when I saw Amber in her swimwear, any thought of going home vanished. I kept forcing my eyes away so she wouldn't think I was a creep. "Do you see that?" I asked when Nate swam over to me. He was about to dunk me but stopped, following my gaze to the other side of the lake, where a white figure stood between 2 trees. It looked like a person, but it was too still to be real, almost as if it was some discarded clothing or trash that hadn't yet been swept up by the wind. "Let's go check it out," Nate said, already starting to swim that way. Amber came up next to me and asked what I thought it was, but as soon as I looked back, the figure was gone. "Probably some old guy spying on us," Nate joked. I tossed some water at him, soon forgetting about the white shape as we splashed around. When we finally headed back, the sky was streaked with orange. Nate and Tim loudly fantasized about the beans they planned to cook. I was relieved I wouldn't be sharing a tent with them, but they soon discovered they'd forgotten the beans in the truck. Amber had left her socks there too, so she volunteered to go back with them. I didn't feel like walking again, so I stayed back to start the fire. I'd been alone for about 5 minutes when I heard Nate's voice calling to me from a distance, but it wasn't coming from the direction they'd gone. "Did you forget something?" I called out, but the voice came again, now from the direction of the lake. Uneasy, I stayed put. Oddly enough, the 3 of them returned together a few minutes later. "Did you see anyone else around?" I asked. "No, just us," Amber replied, noticing something was off. I shook my head, chalking it up to my imagination. We ate around the fire, and the cousins indulged in a post-dinner smoke. Amber joined them occasionally, but tonight she passed. Nate eventually stood up, saying he needed the bathroom. It was dark by then, so I handed him a flashlight. Tim decided to join him, and Amber didn't want to be left alone, so we all headed off together. Just as we finished, we heard something I never expected to hear in the woods at night: a baby crying. The sound was unnaturally close, and a chill ran down my spine. I took a step towards it, but Tim held me back. Amber, however, marched toward the source, worried someone might need help. As we approached a clearing, we saw someone sitting on a log, hunched over and shushing the invisible baby. "Are you okay?" Amber asked hesitantly. "My poor baby," the woman replied. Her voice was unsettlingly normal, given her strange appearance. Amber offered to call someone for her, but the woman only rocked back and forth. She slowly turned her head, revealing eerie gray eyes that seemed to shine in the light. Her face twisted into something monstrous, and we all froze in horror. Nate and Tim bolted, and I grabbed Amber's wrist, dragging her along. The woman, creature, whatever she was, leaped at us, snarling. Amber stumbled, and the thing managed to bite her hand before I beat it off with a stick. Suddenly, we heard a whistle, and the creature froze before running off, retreating into the shadows. A strange man appeared soon after, standing over Nate, who was on the ground with a bite wound on his arm. The man explained that bites from these creatures could turn people into them, though I wasn't sure if I believed him. As we made our way out of the woods, we passed another officer, who insisted we stick to a cover story. I signed, although I wanted to tell the truth. The next day, there was a search, but Amber was never found. Now, I plan to leave this town and move somewhere far away, haunted by memories and an unsettling desire to return to those woods, despite everything that happened there. As the first light of dawn seeped through my bedroom's thin curtains, I felt both a thrill and a hint of unease. Today was the day I'd planned for over a month. A day I'd leave my regular routine behind to venture into the vast wilds of the Mola National Forest. I'd camped before as a child, but those were carefree moments under the careful watch of my family. This time was different. I was heading out alone as an adult, with a nagging feeling that this trip would stand out from any other. I looked over my gear spread across the floor: tent, sleeping bag, extra phone charger, a week's supply of food and water, and the old .357 revolver my dad gave me on my 20th birthday. I had never had reason to use it, but out there it felt like a sensible safeguard. "You can never be too careful," my dad's words echoed as I packed everything into my Jeep. The drive to Mola was filled with both familiar sights and the thrill of the unknown, with each mile taking me further from city life and deeper into raw wilderness. By the time I arrived, the sun was already high, casting dappled light through the thick canopy. I parked in a small clearing, a spot I was sure I'd remember, and took a deep breath of the crisp forest air. "This is it?" I whispered to myself, slinging my backpack over my shoulder and stepping into the dense forest. Setting up camp was both thrilling and tiring. I found a place that seemed to be waiting for me, shielded by trees but still open to the sky above. As I pitched my tent and collected firewood, a feeling of accomplishment washed over me. This was all me. I was making it happen on my own. I cooked a simple lunch over the fire, and out there it tasted like the finest meal. I even managed to snap a picture of a doe hidden between the trees, her quiet presence affirming the vitality in this hidden world. As the day moved on, though, an unusual quiet began to creep in. The forest, once buzzing with rustling leaves and distant calls, fell silent. At first, I brushed it off as part of nature's cycle, but as afternoon gave way to evening, the silence felt heavy, almost like a weight pressing down. To break it, I called a friend, hoping human voices would ease the quiet tension. His laughter and familiar voice provided a momentary comfort, but as we hung up and the dusk settled in, the silence returned, even more intense than before. Night closed in fast, and with it came a sense of complete isolation. I sat by the fire, staring into the flames, lost in my thoughts. The excitement of earlier had shifted to an uneasy feeling, as if I were being watched, not by a friendly presence, but by something unwelcome, hidden in the shadows. Crawling into my tent with the revolver by my side, I couldn't escape the sense that this trip I'd eagerly planned might veer into something unexpected. My last thought before sleep overtook me was a hope that morning would bring back the forest's usual sounds, that this eerie silence was just a passing feeling. The forest floor beneath me was cold and unforgiving, but sleep eventually came, though it was fitful. My dreams twisted into shadows and sounds, blending with the forest surrounding me. A noise, distinct and out of place, snapped me awake. I opened my eyes to a faintly moonlit world, with just enough light filtering through the canopy. The earlier silence had shattered, replaced by a deliberate rhythm of footsteps moving with eerie precision. Baitum, Baitum, my heart raced, trying to match the intruder's cadence. The revolver's weight in my hand offered little comfort. Though I'd been in the woods before, this was a fear I hadn't known. The steps grew closer, almost tauntingly slow against the backdrop of silence. Then, as if sensing my fear, they stopped. Silence descended once more, pressing in so heavily I could hear my own breaths, loud and hurried. Suddenly, a screech broke through, freezing me in place. It was a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard, stripping the breath from my lungs. Panic surged as something outside tore open the fabric of my tent, revealing the darkness, and something monstrous within it. Its silhouette was sharp and distorted, its movements unnaturally smooth as it ripped through the barrier between us. I fired wildly, the noise of the shot deafening, but it only seemed to anger the creature more. Fueled by instinct, I decided to flee. Scrambling for the tent's opening, I threw myself out, the creature distracted for a moment by the shredded tent. The forest, once a safe haven, now felt like a twisted maze. I ran, branches grabbing at me, roots tripping me, but the creature was close behind, its pursuit steady and relentless. In a desperate move, I threw myself into a dense thicket, hoping that being still might save me. My body ached, my breath shallow, but I didn't dare move. Then I saw it, lit by a sliver of moonlight, like a terrible stage. Its form was thin and stretched, an unsettling mockery of a person. When it stood, it resembled a grotesque outline of a human. Our eyes met, and I felt a primal fear, not of dying, but of being truly seen by this thing. And as quickly as our encounter began, it ended. The creature turned and left, pacing away with the same unnerving rhythm it had arrived with. As dawn broke, so did I, shaken but alive. The forest had returned to its vibrant, indifferent self, leaving me to pack my things, my movements robotic, driven by a need to leave this place. As I drove away, the memory of that creature's gaze lingered, a reminder of the fragile line between our world and the unknown. The mola had revealed a dark secret I was never meant to know, and as I returned to civilization, the forest's silence remained, a haunting echo of the encounter that would forever color my nights under open skies. I took my camper out to a wooded area a few miles from my home. I live in a rural spot with lots of surrounding forests, so camping here is pretty common. The area I chose wasn't widely known, more of a hidden spot that could only fit a couple of campers at a time. I liked it because almost no one else went there, and the path was wide enough for my camper to get through without trouble. When I arrived, the grassy area where I parked was empty. With no real plans, I stayed inside for a while, then got out and set up my tent canopy. After that, I put up my chair and began gathering wood to start a campfire. Although it was still early in the day, I wanted to be prepared before it got too dark. I walked far enough into the woods behind my camper that I couldn't see my sight anymore. Most of the wood was damp from rain a few nights ago, so it took a bit to find enough dry pieces. After about 20 minutes, I returned to my camper and noticed a man setting up a tent nearby. He gave me a nod as I returned, and I nodded back just to acknowledge him. Nothing seemed off about him, and I didn't think much of it, aside from feeling a little disappointed that I wouldn't have the area to myself. After dropping the wood, I went inside my camper to grab a beer and relax with the sunroof open. I'm not sure how long I stayed inside, maybe about half an hour, before I got up to look out the window. By then, the man had finished setting up his tent. Now that it was up, I could see how worn out it looked, with holes and tears all over it and loose flaps blowing in the wind. It seemed like an old tent that had been abandoned for years without care. Through the rips, I couldn't see him inside, and I looked around the area but didn't see him anywhere nearby. I stepped out to start the campfire, still glancing over at his rundown tent, wondering why he'd use something so shabby. As the sun went down, I got the fire going and sat by it, still unsure where the man had gone. As darkness crept in, I grew more curious about his whereabouts since he hadn't come back to his tent, even though it was getting pretty late. When I checked my watch, it was almost 1 a.m., meaning it had been dark for nearly 4 hours. I left my chair and approached his tent, calling out, "Are you in there?" There was no answer. I stood there in the middle of the campsite, looking around at the shadows cast by the trees, wondering if he might have gotten lost in the woods. But as I looked into the darkness, I started to feel uneasy. Then, suddenly, I saw movement near a tree, and I froze. I stared in that direction, squinting to make out what I was seeing until, gradually, I saw the shape of a man standing right by the tree, perfectly still, as if trying to stay hidden. Fear surged through me, and the longer I looked, the less certain I was that it was the same man from the tent. Slowly, I backed away, then turned and rushed into my camper. Through the window, I could see the figure still standing there, looking in my direction. After hesitating for a second, I quickly got to the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away from the campsite. Every time I think about that night, what frightens me the most is the thought that he might not have been the same man from the tent. Maybe he had done something to the other man, or maybe they were both out there in the woods watching me without my knowing. I've been wrestling with whether to share this, but it's been stuck in my mind, and maybe writing it down will help me process it. This isn't some made-up story. It happened just a few months back. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and my two best friends, Ryan and Jake, have been close to me since high school. We did sports together, went to the same college, the whole deal. Back in April, Jake's father passed away suddenly from a heart attack, with no warning whatsoever. Jake was shattered. His dad was his biggest support, and losing him hit Jake harder than anything I'd ever seen. After the funeral, Jake was in a dark place, and Ryan and I did everything we could to lift his spirits, but nothing seemed to help. One evening, out of the blue, Jake called and suggested we all go camping like we used to. He said he needed to get away from the city and clear his mind. Ryan and I were on board, thinking some time in nature might be exactly what he needed. We chose to go to Hocking Hills State Park in southeastern Ohio, a huge forest area with dense trees and hardly any people. A perfect place to get away. Ryan had recently gotten a small camper. It wasn't fancy, but it had the basics. A couple of bunks, a tiny kitchen space, and best of all, a heater for the chilly nights. We packed our stuff on a Friday afternoon. Sleeping bags, hiking gear, a cooler full of snacks and drinks, and then hit the road. The drive was full of our usual banter, though Jake was quieter than usual. We didn't push him, just let him be. When we reached the park, we decided to find a spot off the main trails, somewhere secluded where we wouldn't be bothered. After navigating some rough dirt roads, we found a clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. It felt right, so we set up, started a fire, and spent the evening grilling burgers and reminiscing. The sky was clear, and the stars were shining bright. Ryan, who's always been into stargazing, was thrilled. "Look at that sky," he said, leaning back against a log. "You don't see that in the city." "Yeah, it's amazing," I agreed. Jake seemed to relax a bit, sipping his drink and even smiling now and then. It was good to see him unwind. Around midnight, Ryan got an idea. "I'm sleeping on the roof of the camper tonight," he announced. "I don't want to miss this view." Jake laughed. "You're crazy, man." "Maybe," Ryan grinned, "but I'll have the best view." I chuckled. "Just don't roll off in your sleep." He grabbed a sleeping bag and climbed up, getting comfortable on the flat roof. Jake and I decided to turn in and headed inside the camper. It was cozy, 2 small bunks and just enough room to stand. I climbed into my bunk and pulled out my phone, scrolling aimlessly through social media. Jake lay across from me, staring at the ceiling. "You doing okay?" I asked. He sighed. "Yeah, just thinking about my dad. He would have loved this." I nodded. "He was a good man." "Thanks," Jake said softly. Eventually, I started to drift off. Sometime later, I was awakened by a soft knocking. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then it came again, a gentle tap at the camper door. "Jake, did you hear that?" I whispered. He stirred. "Hear what?" "Someone's knocking." We both listened, and there it was, a faint, deliberate knock. "Maybe it's Ryan playing around," Jake suggested. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ryan. "You guys awake?" "Yes," I replied. "Are you knocking on the door?" "Nope, but I see someone outside," he texted back. My heart skipped a beat. "Who?" "Looks like 2 kids standing near the fire pit." I showed Jake the text. He looked as puzzled as I felt. "What are kids doing out here at this hour?" he asked. "No clue," I replied. "Should we check it out?" He nodded. "We can't just ignore them." I called through the door. Hello? Can we help you?" A small voice replied, "Please, we need to use your phone." Something about the voice seemed off. It was flat, almost robotic. "Where are your parents?" Jake asked. "Please let us in," the voice said again. I felt a weird feeling in my stomach. "We can call someone for you," I replied, trying to sound calm. Silence. Then, "We need to come in. Let us in." My phone buzzed again. Another message from Ryan. "Don't let them in. Something's wrong." "What's going on?" I texted back. He replied, "Their eyes. They're totally black." A chill ran down my spine. I showed Jake the message. "What does that even mean?" he whispered. "I don't know, but Ryan sounds serious." The knocking got louder. "Let us in," the voices demanded, more insistent this time. "We'll help you find your parents," I said, trying to keep my composure. "No, you have to let us in," the voice insisted. "Why do you need an invitation?" Jake asked, a little unnerved. "Please, we just want to come in," the voice said again, almost pleading. My phone buzzed yet again. Ryan texted, "They're acting weird. They keep looking up here, but I don't think they can see me. Should we call the police?" I texted back. "Maybe, but we're pretty far out," he replied. Jake looked uneasy. "What do we do?" "Keep the door locked," I said firmly. The knocking stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then we heard footsteps moving around the camper. Slow, deliberate footsteps. "They're walking around," Jake whispered. We stayed quiet, listening to the soft crunch of leaves. The footsteps paused near one of the windows. Please let us in, the voice said, just outside. I peered through the curtain but couldn't make out much, only a small figure by the window. Why won't you let us in? The voice asked, sounding almost desperate. I didn't know what to say, my mind racing. Then, from above, we heard a faint thud. Ryan messaged again. They're trying to climb up here. Be careful. Be careful, I replied. He texted. One of them said something weird. I swear it sounded like, your friends won't help you. I showed Jake the message. This is getting creepy, he agreed. Maybe we need to stick together. Good idea, I nodded. We decided to bring Ryan inside. I gathered the nerve to open the door slightly and called, Ryan, get down here. He quietly climbed down the ladder, and as he reached the ground, we heard one of the voices say, You've made a mistake. We rushed inside and locked the door. What's going on? Jake asked. I don't know, Ryan said, catching his breath. But those kids, their eyes are pitch black, no whites, nothing. That's impossible, I said, but Ryan insisted he saw it. We sat there, trying to process what was happening. Maybe they're wearing contacts, Jake suggested. At this hour, in the middle of nowhere? Ryan replied. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You can't hide from us. I showed it to the others. Did either of you give out your numbers? They shook their heads. How did they get it? Jake wondered. The footsteps started again, this time moving faster around the camper. This is messed up, Ryan said. Should we call the police? Jake asked. I tried dialing 911, but the call wouldn't connect. No signal, I guess, I muttered. Same here, Ryan said, checking his phone. Great, Jake murmured. The voices came again, more frustrated this time. This is your last chance. Let us in. Ignore them, I whispered. We huddled together, hoping they'd leave. Minutes felt like hours. Then, everything went quiet. The footsteps, the voices, gone. Do you think they left? Jake asked. Maybe, Ryan said, doubtful. I looked out the window but saw no one. Let's just wait a bit longer to be sure. We sat there for another half hour, and when no sounds came, we started to relax a little. Maybe it was some kind of prank, Jake suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Who would go to this length? Ryan asked. Kids from town? I don't know. I'm not staying to find out, I said. Let's pack up and get out of here. We gathered our things as quietly as we could and stepped outside. The woods were eerily still. The fire had died down to glowing embers. We loaded the camper, and just as we were about to leave, I heard it. A voice calling from the darkness. Do you think you're leaving? I spun around but saw nothing. Who's there? I shouted, my voice shaky. Silence. Let's go. One summer when I was 14, I stayed with family on the reservation. We lived in the city, but each summer, it was tradition to visit my relatives out in the forest. I always looked forward to this trip, mostly because of my cousins. Ethan, who was 15, Lily, my age, and Kyle, who was 12. Their home was deep in the woods, surrounded by tall trees and the sounds of nature. A world apart from my life back home. One evening after supper, the four of us sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The grown-ups were indoors, laughing and talking. Ethan suddenly turned to us, his eyes gleaming with a sly look. Hey, what if we camped out tonight? He suggested. Lily raised an eyebrow. You know, Grandma and Grandpa would never let us do that. They've told us so many times. No going into the woods after dark. Ethan grinned. Exactly. That's why we won't tell them. Kyle looked nervous. "But what if we get caught?" he asked. I felt torn. A nighttime adventure sounded thrilling, but breaking the rules didn't feel quite right. "Maybe we should just ask first," I suggested, but Ethan shook his head. "They'll say no for sure. Come on, it'll be fun. We'll be back before they even know." Lily turned to me. "What do you think, Sam?" she asked. I hesitated, but the idea of a night out with my cousins was tempting. Finally, I gave in and Kyle sighed. "Fine, but if we get in trouble, it's all on you, Ethan." We waited until the house was quiet and everyone was asleep. Around midnight, we slipped out the back, taking only a few things with us. The forest, usually familiar, looked different at night. The moon cast an eerie glow, and the shadows felt alive as we walked along the narrow path. After about 20 minutes, we found a small clearing by a creek where we often played during the day. We set up our tent by the creek, though putting it together in the dark was a challenge. But once it was up, we settled down with our small battery lantern. The sounds of crickets and the occasional owl gave the place an almost magical feel. "Who's got a good story?" Ethan asked, rubbing his hands together. Lily smirked. "I do. Ever heard of the Raven Stealer?" Kyle shivered. "I hate that one." "Too bad," she teased. "It's about a spirit that takes the hearts of the sick to add years to its own life. It can appear as a bird or even as a person, but only medicine men can see it." "That's creepy," I admitted. Ethan leaned in with a grin. "Ever heard of the Dear Lady?" Lily rolled her eyes. "That's just a story to keep kids from running off." "Maybe," he said. "But people say she appears as a beautiful woman to lure people away, then changes. Her feet are hooves, and her face turns into a deer's." Kyle hugged his knees. "Can we talk about something else?" he asked. I tried to change the mood. "What about the star people?" I said. "They say they came from the skies to teach wisdom to our ancestors." Ethan scoffed. "That's not scary." "Exactly," I said. "Maybe we've had enough scary stories for one night." But Ethan wasn't done. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "Grandpa told me something once," he said. "Something he swears really happened." Lily looked wary. "What are you talking about?" Ethan took a deep breath. "When he was our age, he saw a shapeshifter. We all knew about these witches who used dark magic to turn into animals. It's not something people talk about lightly." "Ethan, maybe we shouldn't talk about this," Lily whispered, but he continued. "Grandpa said he was helping his father gather wood late one night. They got separated and suddenly he saw a coyote standing on two legs, staring at him. Grandpa thought he was seeing things, but it started to walk toward him, its body twisting and changing shape. "Stop," Lily pleaded, but Ethan pressed on. He froze, too scared to run. The coyote had a face, a human face stretched over its skull. It whispered his name, but the voice wasn't human. A heavy silence fell over us. The forest seemed to hold its breath. I shivered. "Why would you tell that story?" Lily snapped, visibly upset. "It's just a tale," Ethan said, though he looked unsettled. Kyle looked terrified. "Do you think they're real?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," I replied, unsure. Part of me wanted to brush it off, but a part of me remembered the warnings. Maybe we should just go to sleep. We crawled into the tent, feeling a bit safer together. I lay there, listening to the sounds outside, every rustle making my heart race. Hours passed. I glanced at my watch. 3:15 a.m. Just as I was dozing off, I heard it. A soft shuffling, like footsteps dragging through the brush. I held my breath, listening hard. Then I heard it again, closer this time. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Lily turned toward me, and Ethan hissed, "Sure, listen." The shuffling grew louder, followed by a faint, raspy breathing. Kyle sat up, wide-eyed. "What is that?" he mouthed. Ethan reached for his flashlight, hands trembling. He unzipped a small part of the tent flap, just enough to see outside. We huddled around him, peering out. His flashlight cut through the dark, illuminating the trees. At first, we saw nothing, but then movement. A figure stepped out from behind a tree. It had the body of a coyote, but its limbs were too long, its fur patchy, its skin stretched over bone. The head was the worst part. It looked like a human face had been pulled over the coyote's skull. It moved in jerky, unnatural steps, circling our camp, wheezing with every breath. It didn't seem to notice us, but it was searching, its head jerking from side to side. Lily covered her mouth to keep from screaming. Kyle clutched my arm, his nails digging in. Ethan lowered the tent flap and shut off the flashlight. "What do we do?" I whispered. "Stay quiet," Ethan replied. "Maybe it'll go away." We sat in silence, listening as the creature moved around us. After what felt like forever, it seemed to grow closer. Then we heard it. "Help me," a voice whispered, raspy and broken. It was trying to speak like a person but sounded wrong. "Help me," it repeated. Kyle started to cry softly. Lily held his hand, tears in her own eyes. "Don't respond," Ethan mouthed. We stayed still as the creature pressed against the tent. The smell was overpowering, like rot and sulfur. "Why won't you help me?" it rasped. I squeezed my eyes shut, silently praying for it to leave. The wheezing continued for ages, but eventually, it faded. When the forest sounds returned, we still didn't dare move. The first light of dawn finally broke, and we felt a wave of relief. We quickly packed up, not bothering to fold anything, and left the tent behind. When we made it back to the house, our grandparents were waiting, their faces a mix of anger and worry. "Where have you been?" Grandma demanded. We went camping," Ethan said, looking down. "After we told you not to?" Grandpa's voice was stern. Lily stepped forward. "We're sorry. We thought it'd be an adventure." They let us inside, and once we were seated, Grandpa looked at each of us. "Did anything happen out there?" he asked. I looked at the others, then nodded. "Yes, sir. We saw something." Grandpa's face grew serious as we described the creature. When we finished, he sighed, nodding slowly. "As I feared," he said. "Was it a shapeshifter?" Kyle asked, barely audible. Grandpa frowned. "Don't speak of it," he said. "Yes, and that's all I'll say." Our parents performed a cleansing ceremony that afternoon. The house was filled with the scent of sage, and we felt safer. We were grounded for the rest of the summer, which was just fine with me. None of us wanted to go back to the woods anytime soon. On my last night, Grandpa joined me on the porch. "You've learned a tough lesson," he said. "The spirits here are powerful. Some are good, others aren't. Remember to respect them and the wisdom passed down through the years." As I went back to the city, that experience stayed with me. I still think of it, especially at night. It's a reminder of the mysteries we don't fully understand, and the importance of listening to those who came before us. Some things are beyond explaining, and maybe that's for the best. Last year, my friend Tara and I decided on a little getaway to Italy. We had both just finished university and wanted to do something exciting before starting our careers. We'd saved up some cash from part-time work and planned a 2-week backpacking trip through the Italian countryside. Naturally, we started in Rome, taking in the major sites like the Colosseum and the Vatican, but both of us were more interested in exploring off the beaten path. So, we made our way south to more rural areas, eager to experience what we called the real Italy. One area that caught our eye was the region of Reggiano. Tara had read about it in a historical thriller and was fascinated by the tale of the creature of Reggiano, a beast that supposedly terrorized the region centuries ago. I'm a bit of a history nerd, so I was on board. We arrived in a quaint village called Montella, nestled among the hills. It was charming, with cobblestone streets and old stone buildings. The locals were friendly but a bit guarded when we brought up the creature's legend. An older woman even muttered something under her breath and made the sign of the cross when we mentioned it. Undeterred, we checked into a quiet little inn, planning to explore the nearby forests the following day. The innkeeper, a middle-aged man named Leo, warned us to stay on the marked paths. People get lost easily, he said in his thick accent, and wolves have been more active recently. Wolves? Tara asked, looking intrigued. Yes, but they rarely approach humans, he replied. Just be careful. The next morning, we loaded our backpacks and set out. The forest was breathtaking, with tall trees forming a canopy overhead and the fresh scent of pine. Birds chirped around us, and it was exactly the peaceful escape we had been hoping for. About 2 hours into our hike, we spotted an overgrown trail that wasn't marked on our map. Ever the adventurous one, Tara thought we should check it out. Come on, Mia, she said, tugging at my arm. This is exactly the kind of adventure we wanted. I hesitated. Leo said to stick to the main trails. She laughed, rolling her eyes. Are you really afraid of an old legend? I grinned. All right, but if we get lost, it's your fault. We ventured down the path, which led us deeper into the woods. The trees grew denser, and the light filtering through gave everything a strange green glow. It was eerie yet beautiful. After an hour, we came upon a clearing with the ruins of an old stone cottage, its walls covered in moss, nearly reclaimed by nature. Imagine who might have lived here, Tara said, brushing her hand over the worn stone. As we explored, I noticed strange symbols carved into one of the walls. They weren't like anything I'd seen, more like ancient signs than letters. Check this out, I called. Tara came over, studying the symbols. Weird, maybe it's an old dialect. Just then, we heard a rustling noise in the trees. We froze. Maybe it's just an animal, I whispered, trying to reassure us both. Maybe we should head back, Tara said, her boldness fading. I agreed. As we turned, I caught a glimpse of something large and dark moving between the trees. It was too big to be a deer. Did you see that? I asked, my heart pounding. See what? I don't know. Something moved over there. We stood still, straining to see, but the woods had gone eerily silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Let's go, Tara whispered. We started walking back quickly, resisting the urge to run. Every so often, I'd hear a twig snap or leaves rustling, but each time I looked back, there was nothing there. Eventually, we realized we weren't on the same trail we had taken before. Are we lost? I asked, trying to keep calm. The path should be right here, Tara muttered, looking around anxiously. Our map was useless, and our phones had no signal under the thick canopy. Let's just retrace our steps, I suggested. Just then, a low growl echoed through the trees. Tara tried to joke, asking if it was my stomach, but her voice shook. We picked up our pace. The growling grew louder, closer. Then Tara let out a scream, and I turned to see a massive animal emerge from the shadows. It looked like a wolf, but was far too large, with matted fur and yellow eyes that seemed to glow. Its snout was elongated, saliva dripping from its fangs. Run, I yelled. We sprinted, branches whipping at our faces as the creature crashed through the underbrush behind us. My lungs burned, but adrenaline kept me moving. Suddenly, Tara tripped on a root and fell. I skidded to a stop, helping her up. Come on, I urged as the beast closed in, snarling. We spotted a rocky incline and scrambled up, hoping it wouldn't follow. At the top, we found ourselves on another path, a marked trail this time. Relief washed over me as I spotted a sign pointing the way back to the village. But before we could catch our breath, the creature appeared below, watching us with those same menacing eyes. It let out a howl that echoed through the trees. "Go!" Tara yelled. We ran down the trail, not stopping until we broke out of the woods and stumbled onto a road, where a small van was parked. An older man, loading crates, looked up, startled as we raced toward him. "Please help us," I gasped. He took one look at us and motioned for us to get in. Without hesitation, we climbed in, and he sped toward the village. "What happened?" he asked in broken English. "Something chased us," Tara said, breathless. He nodded grimly. "The creature. You know about it?" I asked. He didn't answer, but the silence was enough. Back in Montella, we returned to the inn. Leo gave us a knowing look. "You went off the trails, didn't you?" "We're sorry," I said, "but we saw something impossible." Leo sighed. "It's not just a story. Many here have seen it." "Why doesn't anyone do anything?" Tara demanded. He shrugged. "It's a curse that has plagued this place for centuries." That night, we stayed locked in our room, barely sleeping. The next morning, we decided to cut our trip short and return to Rome. As we left, Leo handed us a small charm with an intricate design. "What's this?" I asked. "A protective charm," he said, "for safety." We thanked him and left, eager to put the forest behind us. Back in Rome, the city's busy streets made the whole experience feel like a strange memory. Yet I still have nightmares of those yellow eyes and that growl. Tara and I rarely bring it up. When people ask about our trip, we stick to the usual stories: the Colosseum, the food, the museums. No one would believe us anyway. But sometimes, I wonder what else is out there, hidden in remote places that people are too afraid to talk about. And I can't shake the feeling that we were fortunate to make it out of Reggiano alive. One fall, it was a usual thing for my dad to pick up my brothers and me after school, then head to the mountains for an afternoon of gathering firewood. Dad would chop down the trees and saw them into sections, while my brothers and I rolled the wood to the truck and loaded it up. We'd repeat this assembly line until the truck was full, usually before it got dark. After a long, sweaty day, we'd all pile into the truck, exhausted, and make our way back down the mountain. The following day, we'd unload, split, and stack the wood into neat rows. We'd go through this routine until we had enough firewood for the winter for our house, Grandma's cabin, and extra for some of our elderly neighbors. On one particular afternoon, we decided to try a different logging road on the opposite side of the valley, beyond our usual wood gathering area. My dad wanted a change of scenery, he said, though we had no specific reason for the switch. This logging road hadn't been maintained in a while. Large rocks and fallen branches littered the path. My brothers and I had to walk ahead, pushing aside stones and debris while Dad carefully maneuvered the truck up the twisting mountain road, inch by inch. The climb was grueling, and as we got higher into the dense woods, I began feeling uneasy. I couldn't tell if it was just from the tough hike or something else, but there was a strange charge in the air, like the mountain itself was humming at a level just below what I could sense. It felt like the mountain was aware of our presence and didn't exactly welcome us. Before I could say anything, my younger brother asked, "Does anyone else feel like we shouldn't be here?" My older brother and I stopped and turned to look at him, both nodding. Our silent agreement was broken by Dad honking and motioning us to keep clearing the path. Reluctantly, we kept moving to a small clearing in the woods, where we finally stopped the truck. My dad, either unaware of or ignoring our unease, got his saw and went straight to work. As the wood was cut down and loaded, I couldn't shake the dark, heavy feelings settling over me. I noticed my brothers also glancing over their shoulders now and then, as though they felt it too. Except for Dad, we all seemed on edge. As the sun started to dip below the trees, the sky dimmed, and the uneasy tension only grew stronger. Finally, Dad surprised us by saying we should load up and head home. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and I could see the tension ease from my brothers' faces too. Oddly, the truck was only half loaded, which was unusual. Dad would usually keep working until dark to make sure the truck was full, but tonight he seemed eager to leave. With our half load, we started down the mountain. Though we were tired, everyone seemed more relaxed. We were chatting, joking, trying to shake off the eerie mood from earlier. As we neared the edge of the trees, heading down a switchback, a brown shape suddenly leapt out from the slope beside us. All Dad could do was shout as he slammed on the brakes. The truck, loaded with wood and moving downhill, couldn't avoid colliding with the figure. We stopped, staring out the windshield in silence. In the glow of the headlights was a crumpled deer. Dad got out, muttering to check on things, telling my brothers to stay put. I didn't listen, hopping out and following behind him. The truck seemed fine, just some fur and blood on the grill. Deer were common here, and hitting one wasn't out of the ordinary. But this deer had dropped instantly. At higher speeds, they usually run off after a hit, bolting into the woods on an adrenaline rush. But this one lay crumpled like it had been dead long before we hit it. As we got closer, a thick, foul stench hit us. Deer don't smell good alive, but this was another level, like rot and decay. My stomach turned, and my nose burned from the stench. When we finally got close, I could see it was completely dead. My eyes watered from the stench. Its eyes were gone, replaced by hollow, sunken spaces, and its tongue was black and swollen, hanging out of its mouth. Its stomach was split open, with entrails spilled onto the ground, and under the dim headlights, it looked like its fur and guts were moving, writhing almost. Leaning in, I saw that it was covered in maggots, inside and out. The deer had been dead for days, maybe weeks. Backing away, my stomach lurched. That odd, tense feeling rushed back in. Dad, usually calm and silent, looked visibly horrified in the dim headlights. He wasn't focused on the deer, though. His eyes were fixed down the mountain. His voice was steady but with a hint of fear as he told me to get back to the truck. I quickly obeyed, grabbing the door handle. At that moment, a loud, high-pitched scream echoed through the trees, accompanied by snapping branches. Something was coming up the slope fast. I jumped into the truck, and Dad, not even waiting to close his door fully, hit the gas, sending us lurching forward, running over the deer as we raced down the mountain. With all of us shouting, it was hard to tell if the shrieking was following us or not. But once we broke out of the trees into the valley, everything went quiet except for the truck engine and the wind blowing in through the windows. When we got home, Dad finally parked, and we all just sat in the truck, stunned, no one wanting to get out. Then we all started talking at once, asking questions. Dad shook his head and quieted us. He explained that he'd felt uneasy all day but hadn't wanted to worry us. He described it as being in a stranger's house without permission. As dusk fell, he noticed shadows in the woods, catching glimpses of figures darting between trees. He didn't get a good look, but the movement was enough to make his stomach sink. He decided to leave as soon as possible. After hitting the deer and realizing it was long dead, Dad figured out what was happening. He said something had thrown the deer to get us to stop. And that scream? It wasn't meant for us to hear. He had heard sounds in the dark just beyond the path, like something waiting. It was a trap, he realized. We could have triggered something far worse if we hadn't left when we did. We didn't go back for firewood for the rest of the season. Dad bought what we needed. The next year, we returned to gathering wood, but we never set foot on that mountain again. The Forest Service later closed and reclaimed that road, and the only way back up there now is on foot. None of us are eager to go back. Whatever was there, whatever threw that dead deer, it didn't want us up there. It wanted us gone, or worse. Growing up on a farm with over 200 acres to roam had its upsides. Plenty of space, a sense of peace, and all the freedom you could want. By age 18, I was used to helping my dad with all kinds of work around the place. He ran it with a steady hand, and I pitched in wherever I could. One warm evening, Dad mentioned needing some old trees cleared out deep in the woods. He even offered extra pay for the job, more than he'd usually give, which was enticing since I was saving for an old dirt bike a buddy was selling. The next morning, I loaded up the truck with the gear I needed, using Dad's sturdy trailer to carry it all. The area he wanted cleared was in the least traveled parts of our land, a good drive away. The sun was still setting as I drove, casting everything in a golden light. It took about 30 minutes, with the path getting narrower and more overgrown as I went. When I reached the spot, I took a moment to soak in the quiet. Tall trees towered all around, and the wind had that calm, whispering sound. I started up the chainsaw, and the first few trees came down easily. But as I moved to the next, I got the strange feeling I was being watched. I paused, turned off the saw, and listened. All I heard was the usual sounds of the woods, so I shrugged it off and got back to work. After a couple of hours, while taking a break, I noticed something odd. One of the trees I had just felled was gone. It seemed impossible. Trees don't just disappear. I walked over to check, and sure enough, the stump was there, cleanly cut, but the tree was missing. Puzzled, I looked around, but it was nowhere to be seen. Dismissing it as an oversight, I went on with my tasks. As the day wore on, I felt increasingly uneasy. Shadows seemed to flicker just beyond my line of sight, and at one point, I thought I heard faint laughter. The feeling of being watched returned, more intense than before, but every time I checked, I was alone. By nightfall, after a quick meal, I called my mom to let her know I'd stay out here for the night, not wanting to drive back in the dark. She told me to stay safe and call if I needed anything. With my tent set up, I made a small fire to cook some dinner, just some canned food and hot dogs, but it hit the spot. As I sat by the fire, reading a book my dad had lent me about local history, I began to notice noises in the trees. It sounded like footsteps crunching on dry leaves, just beyond the fire's light. I assumed it was a passing animal, but couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. It was a struggle, but eventually, I lay down to sleep, thinking I was just on edge from being out there alone. Sometime later, a loud thump jolted me awake. I listened closely and could hear something breathing heavily, irregularly. Carefully, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The moonlight cast eerie shadows over everything, and I spotted a figure slipping behind a tree, too large to be any animal I knew. My breath caught. I turned on my flashlight and scanned the trees, but every time the light passed, I just barely caught sight of a tall, thin shape ducking out of view. It seemed to know where I'd look and managed to stay hidden. Finally, I convinced myself I needed to leave. I gathered my things, quietly crept to the truck, and started the engine. But with the loaded trailer, it was tough to maneuver on the rough path. I quickly decided to unhook it and heard a low growl behind me as I did. Too terrified to look, I jumped back in the truck, floored it, and sped back to the farmhouse. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of home. The next morning, I returned with Dad to get the trailer. Everything looked normal in the daylight, and we hitched it back up without trouble. I glanced back as we were leaving and thought I saw a dark shape slip behind a tree, but I couldn't be sure. Back home, I searched through a book on folklore and found an entry on a creature called the Hide Behind. Supposedly, it preyed on people alone in the woods, lurking just out of sight. The resemblance to my experience was too strong to ignore. I shared some of the story with Dad in passing, and he said, "Your grandpa used to talk about strange things in the woods too." From then on, I avoided going deep into the forest alone. Even now, the woods feel different. Quiet, yes, but also a place to be careful around. As a kid, I grew up in a really unusual spot deep in the woods. To this day, I'm unsure what kind of encounter I had. It could have been some kind of spirit or something else entirely. I'm hoping someone can shed some light on what my friend and I experienced that evening. I was around 13 and my friend, let's call him Chris, was about 11. Chris's dad had bought a large forested area about 60 miles from our city in Ontario, Canada. It was pure wilderness when his family got it, but they cleared a spot to build their house. The rest remained untouched, thick woods. A dirt road divided their land into two sections. On the right side, where their house was, the forest felt open and calm with gentle hills, a pleasant place to hang out. The left side was completely different. There was a deep ditch, maybe 6 feet down, followed by a steep hill covered in moss. Beyond the hill, the woods felt dark and ominous, with tall, shadowy pines. It was as if the forest gave off a warning. We joked around, calling that side the Haunted Woods. One fall day, maybe around 2000 or 2001, my family visited Chris's. While the adults were busy, Chris and I decided to explore the woods. Chris's dad warned us about a stray animal that had been getting into their trash. He thought it looked like a Rottweiler or some other big dog and didn't seem well. Patches of fur were missing, and it looked sick. He told us not to approach it if we saw it. The day was calm, cloudy, and windless. Leaves were turning orange and gold, and many had fallen, blanketing the ground. Chris and I walked along the dirt road, with the friendly woods on our right and the haunted woods on our left. We were slightly creeped out by the haunted woods, as usual, but we decided to be brave and tried not to think about it. Eventually, I noticed something odd. On the steep hill to our left, someone had tied a pink ribbon to a low-hanging pine branch. The ribbon was flapping wildly, almost horizontal, as if there were strong winds, but it was completely still that day. I touched the ribbon and even checked for wind the way my dad taught me by wetting my finger. Nothing. I mentioned it to Chris, but he seemed distracted, so we continued on. We reached a point where the hill had a gentler slope, almost like it had been hollowed out, giving us a clear view of the hillside. Chris got excited, thinking he heard something in the haunted woods. He explained there were wildcats in the area, and he thought he heard one. He wanted to try calling it to see if it might come down to us. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of calling out into that creepy forest, but before I could say anything, Chris started loudly meowing. To my shock, something in the forest meowed back. Chris was thrilled and kept meowing, and each time, the forest answered. The sound wasn't echoing, it was responding. As Chris continued, I started to feel uneasy. The rustling of leaves began moving closer, but there was nothing visible. "Look," Chris said. "It's coming towards us." Sure enough, we could hear something moving, as if walking on two legs, but we saw nothing. My nerves were screaming at me that something was wrong. The sounds got louder, coming from different directions, but still we saw nothing. Chris was mad at me for suggesting we leave, saying the kittens were coming to play with us. Suddenly, right by my feet, I heard heavy panting, like a big dog was right there. But when I looked down, there was nothing. I spun around, terrified, but saw no one near us. Then, up the dirt road, maybe 300 feet away, I spotted a lone dog. It resembled a Rottweiler, but it looked terrible, scruffy, with fur missing in patches and skin exposed. It was watching us, but there was no way I could hear it panting from that far. Yet the sound was right at my feet. My fear finally overtook me, and I bolted downhill, Chris racing alongside me, both of us terrified. We made it back safely, and after that, we avoided those woods. One spring break, my buddies and I decided to go on a camping trip. We had set everything up about a week ahead of time, but as the date approached, the weather just kept getting worse. It was unseasonably cold and gloomy, which was strange for Mississippi. When the night finally arrived, it brought another chilly front. I was in my late 20s, so we bundled up and packed some bourbon and a few beers. Our plan was to camp out at a spot my friend was familiar with, accessible only with his 4x4. We wanted a real camping experience, not some designated family campsite, so we aimed to get far from any signs of civilization. The town we left behind was small, just a stop sign and a few hundred people, and then we headed straight into the woods. After about a half hour of rattling around over dried creek beds and weaving around fallen trees, it began to rain. By the time we found our camping spot, the rain had turned to hail. The place was marked by a rundown dirt path a few hundred feet long and the skeleton of an old VW bug. That night, we passed around a bottle and attempted to set up our tents before getting too tipsy. Eventually, we managed to get the tents up and started a fire with some diesel. By then, the hail had stopped, and the empty bourbon bottle lay cracked in the flames. We were gathering a fair pile of empties as we kept drinking, played cards, and eventually dozed off in our tents. The next morning, I slowly woke to the sound of something large being dragged past my tent. It looked like a rusted station wagon hauling the old VW with a chain. That VW had sat there for so long its floor had decayed, and roots held it to the forest floor. Following the wagon's trail, bits of dirt and brush scattered behind it. Inside the station wagon was a woman driving, a man sitting beside her, and 3 shirtless kids in the back where the seats used to be. The man looked out the window, completely ignoring us, while the children, with dirt smeared on their faces, stared blankly, their eyes hollow and far away. It was the kind of deep poverty you see only in certain areas, in the roughest inner-city neighborhoods or remote places like this. The woman spoke in a voice rough from years of smoking and drinking. "You boys from the city, come out here to camp? Well, that's fine as long as you ain't here to do any drugs. Y'all ain't doing any drugs, are ya?" We shook our heads, saying we were just drinking. "Well, that's all right," she said. "I have a drink here and there myself." She leaned in closer. "Wanna know how I knew y'all were out here? Seen them black helicopters flying round. Got some people working for me, you see. This here's my land. They told me someone was out here. Figured I'd better come check on things." She started laughing, a wet, raspy laugh that didn't quite match the dry tone she'd been using. The man kept looking out at nothing, and one of the kids put both hands on the window, peering through us. He looked about 8 or 9, his mouth slightly open, and a line of spit traced down the dirt-covered glass. "Y'all know Katie?" she asked. We didn't. "Well, everyone knows Katie around here. Y'all go to church." I lied and said we did. "Good. Don't got time for those who don't fear God. Why don't you come up to the church tomorrow? Meet Katie. It's just over that hill there. Can't miss it. She'd love to meet you all. Everyone would." We quickly assured her that we'd show up, and she drove off slowly, hauling the VW into the trees. As soon as she was out of sight, we exchanged nervous laughs. It was just nerves. There wasn't anything funny about it. We all have a basic ancient sense for danger that can stir up every so often, and when it does, you listen. There was something wrong. I felt it even before she spoke, just by looking into her eyes. Something was off: the kids, the man, her laughter. We eventually did hike up that hill. We could see for miles, but there was nothing. No buildings, no clearings, just endless forest. We packed up and cut the trip short, heading out before noon. I decided to rent a cabin in the woods for a weekend, hoping to escape the noise of everyday life. The cabin was small and isolated, surrounded by tall trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. It felt perfect for some peace and quiet. I arrived in the late afternoon, unpacked my things, and settled in. The cabin had everything I needed: a small kitchen, a cozy bed, and a wood-burning stove. I felt excited to spend time alone in nature. As night fell, the woods around the cabin grew dark and silent. I made a fire and curled up with a book, but soon the sounds of the forest began to change. The wind rustled the leaves, and I heard the occasional snap of a twig. It was unsettling, but I tried to push it out of my mind. I went to bed early, thinking I'd be able to sleep off the odd feeling. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a loud crash outside. My heart raced as I lay still in bed, straining to listen. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. I wanted to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly got out of bed. The cabin creaked as I moved, adding to the tense atmosphere. I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my skin. The moonlight cast eerie shadows among the trees. I aimed my flashlight towards the sound and saw that a large branch had fallen from a nearby tree, blocking part of the path leading away from the cabin. Relief washed over me, but then I noticed something strange. Footprints in the soft ground, leading away from the cabin. The prints looked like they belonged to a man, large and heavy. My stomach twisted as I realized they weren't mine. Panic set in as I turned to head back inside. I wanted to lock the door and hide, but I stopped short when I heard a rustling noise coming from the trees. It sounded too deliberate to be an animal. I ran back into the cabin, locking the door behind me. My mind raced as I tried to calm down. What if someone was out there? I grabbed my phone, but there was no service. I felt trapped and exposed, a sense of dread filling the cabin. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, holding my flashlight tightly. Hours passed, and every sound outside made me jump. Just when I thought it was safe, I heard a soft knock at the window. It was faint, but it sent a chill down my spine. I didn't move, terrified to even breathe. After what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. I waited, hoping whoever or whatever was out there would leave. Eventually, I dared to peek out the window. The moonlight illuminated the area, but I saw no one. The footprints were still visible in the dirt, leading deeper into the woods. As dawn broke, I felt a mix of fear and relief. I packed my things quickly, glancing out the window every few seconds. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me. The sun began to rise, and with it, a sense of safety returned. I climbed into my car, eager to get away from the cabin and the fear that lingered there. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The cabin slowly disappeared from view, but the memory of that night stayed with me. I promised myself I would never return to the woods alone. Some places, no matter how peaceful they seem, can hide dangers that lurk just out of sight. Last fall, I rented a remote cabin near a lake for a weekend escape. I'd been needing a break from the chaos of city life and thought the quiet woods would help me unwind. It was isolated, nestled among tall trees, with no neighbors or other cabins in sight. I stocked up on food and firewood and settled in, planning to spend my time reading and hiking by the lake. There was no cell service, and that was part of the appeal. A weekend with nothing to do but relax. The first day was peaceful, the weather perfect. I took a hike along the lake in the afternoon, admiring how calm and still everything felt. By nightfall, I was back at the cabin, tired but happy. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves or the wind moving through the trees. I ate, lit a fire in the wood stove, and eventually drifted off to sleep, feeling content. Around midnight, a strange noise woke me. It was faint, but it sounded like someone tapping or knocking, like a branch hitting the side of the cabin. I tried to brush it off as just the wind, but the tapping continued, slow and irregular. After a while, it stopped, and I managed to fall asleep again, thinking nothing of it. The next night, the tapping came back. This time, it sounded more deliberate, as if someone was walking around the cabin, testing each wall. I was wide awake, every small sound suddenly louder in the silent cabin. I lay in bed, telling myself it was just an animal, but the longer it went on, the harder it was to ignore. Eventually, it stopped, and I somehow convinced myself it was just the sounds of the forest playing tricks on me. When I woke up on the third morning, I decided to go outside and check the area around the cabin. As I walked around, I noticed something strange. Footprints in the dirt. They weren't mine, and they were too large to belong to any animal I could think of. They circled the cabin, close to the walls, and then trailed off into the woods. The sight of them left a chill down my spine, but I pushed it aside. Maybe they were old. Maybe someone had been hunting nearby and gotten close to the cabin by mistake. That night, I went to bed early, hoping to leave first thing in the morning. But the tapping started again, this time more persistent, moving from wall to wall like someone was looking for a way inside. I could hear soft footsteps outside, stopping and starting, pacing back and forth. I stayed frozen in bed, every nerve on edge, until finally, the sounds faded away just before dawn. At first light, I packed up and left without even eating breakfast. As I walked to my car, I looked back at the cabin and felt relieved to be putting it behind me. But when I reached my car, I saw something I hadn't noticed the day I arrived. Scratches on the driver's side door. They weren't deep, but they looked like they'd been made recently, with jagged lines stretching across the metal. I hadn't parked near any branches, and there was nothing nearby that could have caused it. Those marks looked intentional. I drove back to the city, feeling tense the whole way. Even now, the memory of those quiet footsteps and the scratches on my car door haunts me. I never found out who or what was out there, but I'm not eager to return to a cabin in the woods anytime soon. One fall, I decided to spend a weekend alone in a remote cabin to get away from the city. I'd been feeling overwhelmed and thought some quiet time in the woods would clear my head. The cabin was basic, just one room with a small kitchen, bed, and a fireplace. There was no cell reception, which I welcomed, thinking it would help me disconnect for a few days. The first day passed quietly. I explored the area around the cabin, watching the leaves change colors and listening to the birds. The solitude felt peaceful, but by nightfall, the silence settled heavily. Without the usual city sounds, every creak in the cabin and every rustle outside seemed amplified. I told myself it was just the wind and the woods adjusting to the night. But the second night, things took a strange turn. Late into the night, I woke up to a faint noise, like something scraping against wood. I lay still, trying to figure out if it was the wind or an animal. The noise was soft but steady, like someone was slowly running something sharp against the outside wall. I stayed quiet, hoping it would stop, but it continued, moving along the wall as if something, or someone, was circling the cabin. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably just a branch or an animal brushing against the wall. But the noise didn't sound random. It was slow and purposeful, and it circled the cabin several times. I pulled the blanket over me, hoping the sound would eventually stop. Finally, after what felt like hours, the noise faded, and I was able to fall back asleep. When morning came, I stepped outside to look for anything that might explain the noise. The ground was covered in a layer of fallen leaves, but near the cabin, I noticed something strange. There were clear drag marks, like someone had pulled something heavy around the cabin. My stomach dropped when I saw faint footprints in the soft ground next to the marks. They were larger than mine and spaced widely, as if whoever or whatever made them had been walking slowly and deliberately. I followed the prints and drag marks around the cabin. They circled the entire perimeter, then led off into the woods and disappeared. The sight of those prints, knowing I'd heard them in the dark, sent a chill through me. It made me realize that whatever had been outside wasn't a random animal. It was someone, and they had been close. I didn't waste any time after that. I packed up my things as quickly as possible and started down the trail, looking back over my shoulder every few steps. I kept thinking about how I'd been lying in that cabin, just a thin wall away from whoever had been outside, and how easily they could have come inside if they'd wanted to. I was exhausted by the time I made it back to my car, but the relief I felt as I locked myself inside was like nothing I'd ever known. I drove away, never looking back, and I never felt the urge to go back to the woods again. I had been looking forward to a quiet weekend away in the woods. After weeks of work stress, the idea of being alone in a small cabin, surrounded by nothing but trees, felt perfect. The cabin was old but sturdy, with a small wood stove, a single bed, and large windows looking out onto the forest. No phone signal, no Wi-Fi, exactly what I needed. The first night went by peacefully. I sat by the fire, read a book, and let myself fall into a deep, heavy sleep. By morning, I felt rested, enjoying the quiet and the fresh forest air. But that evening, just after sundown, something strange happened. I was sitting inside with the only sound being the crackling fire. It was that deep kind of silence you only find in the woods. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, crunching over the fallen leaves. I froze, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was an animal? But no, the steps were too heavy, too rhythmic. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But then I heard them again, moving around the cabin, as if someone was circling it. My heart began to pound as I waited, barely daring to breathe. The steps would pause, then start up again, each time sounding closer to the cabin walls. I didn't want to overreact, but I wasn't stupid. I grabbed the small pocket knife I had packed and stood by the door, ready to defend myself if necessary. The steps stopped, and for a while, everything was quiet. I was almost convinced that maybe it had been an animal after all. But then, I noticed something. The door handle was moving, slowly, as if someone was testing it. My blood went cold. I kept completely still, knife clutched tightly in my hand. After a few tense seconds, the handle stopped moving, and I heard the footsteps retreating. I waited, heart pounding, for what felt like an eternity, until finally, I couldn't hear anything. I barely slept that night, jumping at every tiny noise. At dawn, I quickly packed my things and left. As I got into my car, I noticed something on the cabin door. 3 deep scratches carved into the wood near the handle. They were fresh, like someone had dragged a knife or a blade down the door. Driving away, I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just some stranger trying to scare me. But something in me knew it was more than that, and I realized I wouldn't be coming back to the cabin anytime soon. The silence I had once looked forward to now felt too empty, too unsettling, and I couldn't forget the sound of those steps in the night. I decided to take a weekend away from the city and rented a small cabin deep in the woods. I'd been feeling burnt out from work and just needed to clear my head. The cabin was isolated, but that was part of the appeal. No distractions, no people, just me and the silence of nature. It was a small place just big enough for one person. There was no Wi-Fi and cell service was patchy, which only added to the sense of being off the grid. The first night was quiet. I settled in, read a book by candlelight, and listened to the occasional sounds of wildlife outside. Around midnight, I heard some scratching noises coming from behind the cabin. I brushed it off as an animal and didn't think much of it. But the scratching didn't stop. It would go silent for a few minutes, then pick up again, now on a different wall. I figured a raccoon or something was trying to get in, so I just pulled my blanket tighter and tried to ignore it. The next morning, I walked around outside, looking for signs of an animal. I found faint claw marks along the wood of the cabin, but nothing that alarmed me. I thought it might be a stray dog or some other small animal, and I went about my day. The hours passed peacefully, and by dusk, I was feeling more relaxed than I had in weeks. That night, though, things felt different. As I was getting ready for bed, I realized just how quiet it was outside. Too quiet. Even the usual sounds of birds and insects had stopped. Then, around midnight again, the scratching started, this time louder and more aggressive. I sat up in bed, trying to convince myself it was the same animal from before, but the noise was getting closer, like it was moving along the outside walls. I started to feel uneasy. It was an unshakable feeling that something was wrong. The scratching grew louder, and then I heard a low thud, as if something heavy was being dragged across the ground outside. My heart pounded as I thought about all the possibilities, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I sat there listening until the sound stopped altogether. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, clutching my flashlight, too scared to even breathe loudly. In the morning, I packed up and decided to leave early. As I stepped outside, I noticed something odd. A series of deep, uneven footprints leading from the edge of the woods to the cabin and then back again. They weren't from any animal I knew of, and they looked almost human but distorted, like whoever or whatever had made them was injured or dragging something. They led off into the trees, vanishing into the dense brush. I didn't stick around to investigate. I got in my car and drove back to the city, my nerves on edge the entire way. Weeks passed, and I tried to push the memory of that night out of my mind, but I never really could. I never found out who or what it was that circled the cabin. But every now and then, late at night, I still hear that scratching in my dreams. One weekend, I decided to escape the city's constant noise and pressure by renting a cabin deep in the woods. It seemed perfect, quiet, isolated, with no one around for miles. The cabin itself was old but well kept, with a large front porch and creaky wooden floors. It felt just right for the kind of break I was looking for. After unloading my things, I took a walk through the nearby woods, letting the sounds of nature relax me. The silence was so deep it was almost loud, broken only by the occasional rustle of branches or the sudden flap of a bird's wings. As the afternoon faded into evening, I headed back to the cabin, ready to settle in for the night. The first few hours were peaceful. I read a book, cooked a simple meal, and finally stretched out on the couch, listening to the distant sounds of the forest. But as night took hold, the atmosphere began to change. I noticed little noises at first, an occasional creak on the porch, a soft thud against the walls. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just the old structure settling. Around midnight, I was startled by a louder sound, a distinct crunching of footsteps just outside the cabin. It was slow, deliberate, like someone taking careful steps. My heart started to pound. I thought about getting up to check, but my mind kept coming up with rational explanations. Maybe a deer had wandered close, or maybe the sound was just the wood shifting in the cold night air. But then came a sharp knock on the front door. There was no mistaking it this time. Someone was outside. I didn't move, barely even breathed, hoping they'd go away. Seconds passed, feeling like hours, and the knocking stopped. But just as I started to relax, it started again, louder and more insistent this time. I felt trapped. My car was parked just a few yards away, but there was no way I was about to open the door and risk seeing who or what was out there. I decided to stay as quiet as possible, hoping that whoever it was would eventually give up and leave. The knocking turned into banging, and the sound was frantic, desperate, like someone trying to break in. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. I felt completely cut off, left to face this unknown threat alone. The banging continued, echoing through the small cabin, and then silence. Minutes passed, stretching into an hour, then 2. I didn't sleep. I just sat there, wide-eyed, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. Eventually, dawn broke, casting light through the thin curtains. I gathered my things, not even bothering to repack, and made a run for my car. As I drove away, I looked back at the cabin. It stood there, still and quiet, as if nothing had happened. I left that place behind without looking back, but the memory of that night stayed with me, a reminder of just how vulnerable isolation can make you. I never found out who or what was at the door that night. Maybe it was just someone lost, looking for help. But the fear I felt was real, and it's the last time I'll ever stay alone in a place like that. I had decided to spend a quiet weekend alone in an old cabin up in the mountains, hoping to escape the stress of work and the constant hum of city life. The place was isolated, surrounded by thick trees, and had a small lake nearby. It seemed perfect when I booked it online. No neighbors, no traffic, just silence and nature. I packed some essentials, brought extra blankets and firewood, and figured I'd have a peaceful couple of days. The first night was colder than I'd expected, and the cabin creaked in the wind. I kept hearing faint rustling noises, but I told myself it was just animals outside. I tried to sleep but couldn't shake an uneasy feeling, like I was being watched. I brushed it off, put it down to city nerves, and finally drifted off. The next day, I took a short hike around the cabin, staying close by so I wouldn't get lost. I noticed strange things that seemed out of place. A fresh cigarette but near the edge of the lake, some footprints in the mud that didn't look like mine, and a worn, old jacket hanging on a tree branch. I hadn't seen anyone else out here, so it felt strange, but I convinced myself these were just leftovers from whoever had rented the cabin before me. That night, though, things got stranger. As I was about to go to bed, I heard what sounded like footsteps outside. I froze, holding my breath, straining to hear through the thin walls. The footsteps stopped, but then something tapped against one of the windows, like a branch, only there weren't any trees that close. I told myself it was probably just an animal drawn by the light inside. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of the cabin door creaking open. My heart pounded as I lay still, every muscle tense. The door was locked. I checked it twice before bed. I held my breath, trying to listen, and I heard faint shuffling sounds near the doorway. Whoever or whatever was out there was trying to be quiet. I stayed motionless, too afraid to even get out of bed. After what felt like an hour, the sounds finally stopped, and I heard the door shut softly. I stayed awake the rest of the night, eyes fixed on the door, barely breathing. When dawn broke, I forced myself to check the cabin. Nothing was missing, but the door was slightly ajar, despite the lock still being in place. I didn't waste a second. I packed up my things and left, my heart still racing. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone lurking behind the trees or watching from a distance. I never saw anyone, but I knew something or someone had been there with me. I still don't know if it was a prank or if someone had been hiding out there watching, but I never went back to that cabin. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that I was being watched and that leaving when I did was the only reason I made it out safely. I thought a weekend alone in a secluded cabin would be the perfect break. I'd found a place online, buried deep in the woods, far away from the noise of the city. It looked cozy in the photos, and something about being away from my phone and laptop sounded like the reset I needed. I arrived in the late afternoon, dropped my bags inside, and took a quick look around. It was exactly what I wanted. Just a small, rustic cabin with a simple bed, a fireplace, and big windows that showed nothing but trees. As night fell, the silence around me felt almost too deep. I'd never been in a place so quiet. There were no distant cars, no planes overhead, just the occasional creak from the old cabin or rustle of leaves outside. I tried to read, but my mind kept wandering, caught on every little sound. Finally, I decided to go to bed early, figuring I'd be more comfortable with a fresh start in the morning. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, startled by a sound that was sharper than the others. A faint scraping noise just outside. My heart started pounding, and I lay there, frozen, listening. Sounded close, maybe just by the door. My mind raced through all the things it could be. An animal, a branch scratching against the wood, but something about it felt off. I got up quietly and peeked through the window, my breath fogging up the glass. In the dim moonlight, I could see fresh footprints in the dirt outside, leading right up to the door. I hadn't brought much to defend myself, but I found a heavy flashlight and clutched it tightly, listening. The sound stopped, and for a moment, I thought maybe it was my imagination or an animal passing by. But just as I started to calm down, I heard footsteps moving away, slowly crunching on the forest floor. Whoever, or whatever, had been right outside my door was now heading deeper into the woods. In the morning, I went outside to inspect. The footprints were still there, clear as day, too large for an animal and unmistakably human. I looked around but saw nothing out of place, just the tracks leading away from the cabin and disappearing into the trees. I packed my things right after that. Whatever it was, whoever it was, I wasn't about to stick around and find out. By the time I reached my car, I felt a wave of relief, like I just walked away from something that could have gone very wrong. As I drove away, I kept glancing back at the cabin in the rearview mirror, feeling the weight of a close call with something I didn't fully understand. But that left a chill that lingered long after I was safely home. I never considered myself someone who'd fear silence, but after that night at the cabin, silence gained a new edge. I had rented a small cabin in the woods for a weekend away from the city, thinking the quiet would clear my mind. I'd been stressed out from work and figured some isolation would help me breathe a little easier. The cabin was simple: one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a wood stove that I struggled to light. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves outside and the creaks of the old wooden floors. The first night was uneventful. I woke up to sunlight and the distant sound of birds. I spent the day reading, walking in the woods, and cooking up a quick meal. The forest was thick, with trails that seemed to twist and lead nowhere, so I stuck close to the cabin, not wanting to get lost. By sunset, a deep stillness fell, one that felt heavier than during the day. The air was so silent it was like the world had stopped moving, and there was something unsettling about it. But I shook it off, reminding myself this was what I'd come for: peace and quiet. Then, around midnight, I heard it, a soft, repetitive thump coming from outside. I sat up in bed, my ears straining to catch any sound. The noise stopped, and for a few minutes, there was nothing, only silence. I lay back down, trying to convince myself it was just a branch or some animal. But just as I started to relax, the sound came again, this time louder, closer. It was coming from just outside the cabin door. I stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding. I wasn't about to open that door in the middle of the night. I told myself it was probably just an animal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After a long stretch of silence, I finally managed to drift off, only to be woken up again by a scraping sound near the windows. The noise was slow, deliberate, like someone or something was dragging something sharp across the glass. At that point, I knew I couldn't stay in the cabin. It didn't matter what was outside. I just wanted to get out of there. I packed up my things as quietly as I could, keeping the lights off. I grabbed my car keys and, after a tense minute waiting for any other sounds, opened the door. The night was pitch black, but I didn't waste time. I bolted for my car, locked the doors, and drove down the rough road without looking back. It wasn't until I reached the town about 20 miles away that I finally let myself breathe. I checked my phone for any messages or missed calls, and it hit me that I hadn't had any signal at the cabin. I hadn't even thought about it until then. I stopped at a small diner to gather myself, and as I drank a coffee, I overheard some locals talking about a recent break-in near the cabin area. Apparently, someone had been breaking into remote cabins and stealing supplies, sometimes even waiting for the renters to leave for groceries before slipping in. That night, I couldn't shake the thought that someone might have been watching me in that cabin, maybe even planning to come inside. It was a relief to realize I hadn't been imagining things, but it left a hollow feeling in my gut. As I drove back to the city, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I might have come to finding out what was behind those noises. I was safe, but I'd never really feel alone in the same way again. One winter, I decided to rent a small cabin in the woods, far from any city noise. I'd been feeling burnt out and thought some time alone might help. The cabin was just a one-room setup, basic but enough for a few nights. There was no cell service, no internet, just me and the sounds of the forest. I felt that familiar mix of excitement and unease as I unpacked. I was eager to be alone with my thoughts, yet the silence was so thick it seemed almost oppressive. The first night passed without much happening. I stayed inside, reading and jotting down notes, trying to reflect and unwind. The wind howled outside, branches tapping against the window, but that was it. The quiet made it hard to sleep, but by morning, I had gotten a bit more used to it. The second night, however, was different. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside, crunching through the snow. They weren't the casual steps of someone passing by, and I knew no one else should be out here. I stayed very still, hoping it was just an animal, though deep down I knew it didn't sound like one. The steps circled around the cabin, pausing occasionally. My heart was pounding, and I could feel every thud in my chest. I tried to tell myself that maybe it was just a hiker who got lost, someone who'd made their way up here accidentally. But as I listened to the careful, deliberate sound of those steps, something felt off. There was no random wandering. These steps felt like they had a purpose. When they stopped directly outside my door, I held my breath. I was in total darkness, too afraid to turn on the lights and reveal I was inside. I stayed motionless, straining to hear any sign of them leaving. Minutes passed, then more, but I heard nothing. Just as I was starting to think they'd gone, I heard a faint scratching at the door, like someone was running their fingers along the wood. It was slow, almost testing, feeling for any sign of weakness. Panic surged in me, and I started running through options in my head, but none of them seemed like they'd actually help. After what felt like hours, the scratching stopped. I waited, tense, barely breathing. Eventually, I dared to glance out the window, but there was no one there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't gone far. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a corner, holding my flashlight like it could protect me somehow. By dawn, I didn't waste a second packing up. I left the cabin exactly as I'd found it and started down the snowy path back to my car. When I reached the spot where I'd parked, I saw something that made me stop. Right there in the snow, next to my tire tracks, were a set of footprints leading off into the woods. They were fresh and they weren't mine. Whoever had been out there had come close to my car at some point during the night. I got in, locked the doors, and didn't look back. Whatever peace I'd hoped to find out there wasn't worth the dread that had set into my bones. I'd always loved camping alone. Something about the quiet of the forest and the complete freedom of it had always appealed to me. So, when I had a free weekend, I decided to head out to a spot I hadn't been to in years. It was a little more remote than most places I camped, far from the popular trails and tucked away from any cell service. Just me, my tent, and miles of wilderness. The hike was longer than I remembered, and I reached the spot just before sunset. The trees were dense here, towering pines that seemed to block out half the sky, and the ground was thick with underbrush. I set up my tent and started a small fire to cook dinner. As the light faded, the air grew colder, and the silence of the forest settled around me. After eating, I put out the fire and got into my tent, zipping it up tight. I lay there in my sleeping bag, just listening to the forest sounds. The occasional rustle of leaves, the soft calls of distant birds. I felt completely alone, in a way that was both peaceful and eerie. It must have been around midnight when I woke up. Something had startled me out of sleep, but I didn't know what. I lay there, listening to the silence, when I heard it. Footsteps outside my tent. Slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing. My first thought was that it had to be an animal. But as I listened, I realized the steps were too steady, too measured. They sounded like a person walking slowly around my campsite. I lay completely still, barely breathing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. Whoever was outside moved with purpose, circling my tent. Then, the footsteps stopped, and I could hear a faint scratching sound, like something brushing against the fabric of the tent. It was light, almost hesitant, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I stayed frozen, unsure of what to do. My flashlight was next to me, but I was too afraid to reach for it, afraid that the light would draw attention. After a few minutes, the scratching stopped, and everything went silent again. I listened, my ears straining for any sound, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no rustling. Just the thick, heavy quiet of the forest. I lay there, staring into the darkness, trying to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe it had been an animal after all. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. When I woke up again, it was still dark, but something felt wrong. There was a smell, an awful sour stench like rotting meat. It was strong, hanging in the air around my tent, and my stomach turned. I sat up, feeling a surge of panic. I had to get out of there. I unzipped the tent cautiously, poking my head out. The smell was even stronger outside, and as my eyes adjusted, I saw something lying near the edge of my campsite. It was a dead animal, a deer, its body twisted and torn, as if it had been dragged there and left. The ground around it was disturbed, the dirt churned up with what looked like footprints leading into the trees. My hands were shaking as I packed up my things as quickly as I could. I left the tent behind, too afraid to stay a minute longer than necessary. As I started hiking out, I kept looking over my shoulder, the sense that I was being watched never leaving me. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind felt like something following, something close. The hike back to the car felt endless, and I didn't relax until I was safely inside, doors locked. As I drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something standing there, watching me. I never went back to that spot. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there that night, leaving a dead animal by my tent and circling in the darkness. I still camp, but I always stick to the more popular spots now, where I know there are other people nearby. Whatever happened that night, it was enough to remind me that Out there in the woods, you're never as alone as you think. It was late October, and I thought a solo camping trip might be the perfect way to unwind. The idea of disconnecting and just being in nature sounded right, and I'd camped alone plenty of times before. I packed up everything I'd need: tent, food, flashlight, extra clothes, and drove out to a spot in the mountains I'd visited once before with friends. It was a bit isolated but beautiful, with tall pines and a small, clear river cutting through the valley below. I set up camp about 2 miles from where I'd parked, away from the few trails in the area. By the time I got everything ready, it was late afternoon. I spent a couple of hours hiking around and then made a small fire to cook dinner as the sun went down. There was something peaceful about sitting out there, just me and the quiet sounds of the woods. I had no cell service, but that was part of the appeal. No distractions, just silence and solitude. As the fire died down and the darkness settled in, I felt a sense of calm, sitting there with only the crackling embers for light. But then, just past the glow of the fire, I heard what sounded like someone moving through the trees. My first thought was that maybe an animal was out there, but the sound was too controlled, too steady. It was footsteps, clear and deliberate, and they were getting closer. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe another camper, but I knew that wasn't right. I was off any main path, and it was too late for anyone to be wandering around in the dark. The footsteps stopped just beyond the ring of light from my fire, and I strained to see anything out there, but it was pitch black. For a few long minutes, everything was silent. I could feel my pulse racing, a tense silence wrapping around me. After what felt like forever, the footsteps started again, this time circling the edge of the clearing, slowly and deliberately. Whoever it was wasn't coming closer, but was moving around the perimeter. It was as if they were waiting or watching, testing my reaction. I didn't move, didn't want to draw attention, hoping they'd just go away. But the circling continued, and my fear was turning to panic. I kept my flashlight in my hand, ready, but I didn't dare turn it on, afraid it would give away exactly where I was. I felt trapped in my own camp, not sure what to do. Then, just as suddenly as the sounds began, they stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. I waited, listening for any hint of movement, but everything was still. I sat there for a long time, barely breathing, expecting those footsteps to start up again, but they didn't. Eventually, I heard something farther off in the trees, a single snap of a branch, and then, slowly, the woods returned to their usual sounds. Whoever or whatever had been out there was gone. I waited until the first light of dawn before I packed up. I didn't sleep at all. I just sat by the dying embers, eyes darting around the shadows, heart pounding with every small sound. When morning finally came, I packed up as fast as I could and hiked out, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I got back to my car, I felt a weight lift off my chest, a flood of relief. As I drove back, I kept thinking about those footsteps and that strange, deliberate circling in the dark. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there, watching me, testing my limits, just beyond the light. It was like they were toying with me, letting me know they were there without showing themselves. I still go camping sometimes, but I haven't gone alone since that night. Whatever was out there, it wasn't an animal. It was someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and it made me realize just how vulnerable I'd been. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, a way to clear my head. I drove out alone to a spot I'd heard about from a friend, a little-known area tucked far off any marked trail. It was deep enough into the forest that the air felt cleaner, untouched by other campers. I arrived just before sunset, parked my car on the rough, narrow path, and hiked in about half a mile to find a clearing. The forest was dense and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every step, every movement around you. I set up my tent and got a fire going, cooking a simple dinner and settling in to watch the stars come out. It was peaceful, exactly what I had come here for, and I felt the stress of the past few weeks start to fade away. But as night fell, that peacefulness turned into something different. It was darker out here than I'd expected. The fire only lit a small circle around me, and beyond it, everything disappeared into shadows. The sounds of the forest changed too, from birds and squirrels to things I couldn't quite identify. Snaps and rustles that seemed to grow louder as the night deepened. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just animals. Around midnight, I put out the fire and crawled into my tent, zipping it up tight. I lay there in the dark, listening to the quiet sounds outside, waiting to drift off to sleep. At some point, I woke up. I didn't know what time it was, but everything felt still, too still. Then I heard it, footsteps. They were heavy, slow, and deliberate, crunching on leaves and twigs just outside my tent. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard anyone approach. No voices, no distant sounds of a flashlight or anything. Just these slow, measured steps circling my campsite. I lay there, too afraid to move. The steps grew closer, slow and steady, like whoever it was had no intention of hiding. They circled around my tent, stopped for a second, then started again, as if they were thinking about something, weighing a decision. I held my breath, hoping they'd move on, but they didn't. They just kept circling, pausing, circling again. After a few minutes that felt like hours, the footsteps finally faded, retreating back into the forest. I stayed perfectly still, my ears straining, but the footsteps didn't return. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I must have dozed off, though it was a light, restless sleep. When morning finally came, I wasted no time. I stepped out of the tent, scanning the ground. Sure enough, there were footprints, large and distinct, circling my tent in the soft earth. They weren't mine, and the depth of them suggested whoever it was had stood still for quite a while. I looked around, but there was no one, no sign of anyone else having camped nearby. Packing up, I noticed something that sent a shiver down my spine. Just a few feet from where I had pitched my tent, tucked into the bushes, I found an old, weathered hunting knife stuck into a tree, as if someone had deliberately left it there. The blade was rusty, worn from time, but it looked like it had been placed recently, maybe the night before. I left quickly, my mind racing the entire hike back to the car. The knife, the footprints, the heavy footsteps circling my tent, they all felt like warnings. That feeling of being watched, of someone walking around my camp, hadn't been my imagination. I never did figure out who was out there with me, or why they left the knife, but it made something clear to me. Some places in the woods are best left alone. I haven't been back since, and I don't plan to. I decided to go camping alone. I'd been working non-stop, and I thought a weekend in the wilderness would be a great way to clear my head. I chose a remote area, far from popular trails, the kind of spot where you could go a whole weekend without seeing another person. It sounded perfect. I hiked out a couple of miles before I found a spot that seemed good. It was right by a small stream with flat ground for the tent and thick trees all around. I set up camp, made a small fire, and cooked a simple dinner. As the sun set, the forest turned quiet, the way it does when it's so far from any roads or houses. It felt peaceful, just me and the sounds of the forest. Wind in the trees, water running over rocks, and the occasional chirp of a distant bird. After a while, I crawled into my tent, zipped up my sleeping bag, and drifted off. I didn't sleep long. At some point in the night, I woke up suddenly, that feeling of being watched prickling at the back of my neck. It was pitch dark, and I lay there listening. At first, it was quiet, but then I heard something. A crunching sound, like footsteps moving slowly, carefully, over dry leaves. My first thought was a deer or maybe a raccoon sniffing around, but the footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate. They circled my tent, moving in slow, uneven steps. Whoever or whatever it was didn't seem in a hurry. I held my breath, every muscle tense, listening as the steps stopped on the far side of the tent. Then I heard another noise, something scraping against the fabric, like fingers or maybe a knife. I was paralyzed. My mind raced, wondering who would be out here, so far off the main trails, so far from any other campsites. My heart pounded as I lay there, praying the stranger would just go away. Finally, the scraping stopped, and the footsteps slowly moved away, fading into the darkness. I lay there, every sound amplified, trying to stay calm, telling myself it was just a hunter or maybe a lost hiker. Somehow, I drifted off again, but it was a restless, uneasy sleep. At dawn, I crawled out of the tent, scanning the area around me. The dirt near my tent was disturbed, and I saw boot prints leading away from where I'd been sleeping, disappearing into the woods. It was like someone had just stood there, watching. I didn't stick around. I packed up as fast as I could, checking over my shoulder constantly. The whole way back to the car, I felt jumpy, every rustle in the bushes setting me on edge. When I finally reached my car and shut the door behind me, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of those footsteps outside my tent, the way they circled me, the slow scrape of something against the fabric. I still don't know who was out there that night or what they wanted, but that trip reminded me of something I'd somehow forgotten. Just because the woods are quiet doesn't mean you're alone. It was early autumn, and I'd driven a few hours out of town to a remote lake I'd found online. The idea of spending the weekend away from people sounded perfect, just me, my tent, and the quiet sounds of nature. I found a nice spot near the water, away from the main trails, surrounded by thick trees. The sun was setting when I finally got my camp set up, painting the sky in shades of red and orange. Everything felt right, calm, alone. The first night went by smoothly. The stars were out, bright and clear, and I slept deeply, with just the gentle sound of the lake in the background. The next day, I spent most of my time exploring, climbing a small hill nearby to get a better view. I didn't see anyone all day, not one person, which felt strange, but I figured that was part of the appeal of going somewhere so remote. When evening came, I built a small fire and ate dinner, letting the silence of the forest settle over me as darkness closed in. That night, something changed. I woke up suddenly, heart racing, without knowing why. I lay still, listening. At first, it was just the normal sounds of the forest leaves rustling in the wind, branches creaking. But then, in the distance, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping. It sounded like something metallic, almost like someone was hitting a rock with a stick. The sound was odd, not something you'd expect out there, but I figured maybe it was an animal knocking something over or messing around. The tapping continued, though slow and steady, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't random. It sounded too deliberate, like someone was taking their time, pacing themselves. Every time it stopped, the silence felt heavier, pressing in around me. I lay there for hours listening, muscles tense. At some point, I drifted off, but the tapping stuck in my mind, echoing in my dreams. The next morning, I got out of the tent and walked around, looking for signs of anything unusual. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches. Just silence and the distant, empty lake. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. I spent the day fishing and relaxing, and by the time evening came, I almost felt normal again. But that night, the tapping returned, only closer. It sounded like it was coming from the other side of the lake, echoing across the water. Every few seconds, a slow, metallic tap, then silence. Tap, silence. I felt a creeping unease growing in me, the kind you can't brush off with logic. I could see nothing in the dark, no movement, no light from another campfire. I told myself it was just a strange echo, that maybe it was some animal behavior I didn't know about. Still, I didn't sleep that night. I sat up, listening, wide-eyed and tense, waiting for the first light of dawn. When it finally came, I packed up immediately, the tapping still playing in my head. I hiked back to my car without stopping, feeling that prickling sensation on the back of my neck like someone was watching me. When I finally got to the car, I threw my gear in and started the engine, heart racing, eager to leave that silence behind. As I drove away, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Along the edge of the road, leading out of the forest, were boot prints in the dirt. They were fresh, deep, like someone had been walking slowly, deliberately, and they were spaced evenly apart, almost like they'd been made to the beat of a slow, tapping rhythm. I never found out who or what was making that sound, but I knew one thing: I'd been wrong. I wasn't alone that weekend, and the thought of those footsteps still haunts me. I decided to go camping alone for a weekend to clear my head. The spot I chose was remote, miles away from any marked trail, deep in a national forest. I'd been hiking for hours before I found a flat spot near a small clearing and set up my tent. By the time I got everything ready, it was already late afternoon. I gathered some firewood and cooked a quick meal as the sun dipped below the trees. The silence of the woods was both peaceful and heavy, but that's what I wanted. A break from everything and everyone. As night fell, the forest felt darker than usual. The only light came from my small fire and the dim glow of my flashlight. I wasn't too bothered. I'd camped alone before and figured I'd sleep just fine. But then, around midnight, I woke up suddenly. It was that kind of wake up where you don't remember dreaming or stirring. You're just suddenly awake, alert, and aware of the darkness around you. I lay there in my sleeping bag, trying to figure out why I'd woken up. Then, I heard it, a low, steady thump, like something heavy dropping onto the ground. It was close, maybe 30 or 40 feet away. At first, I thought it could be a branch falling or maybe a deer moving through the brush. I tried to calm myself, thinking of all the normal things that could make a sound like that in the woods. But the thumping sound came again, and this time it was closer, a few steps away from my tent. My heart started racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was deliberately walking toward me. I lay there, holding my breath, listening, trying to figure out what it could be. Then, I heard what sounded like deep, uneven breathing, slow and heavy, just outside my tent. I stayed as still as possible, my mind racing through every survival tip I knew. I didn't dare turn on my flashlight. The breathing paused, then the thumping steps resumed, circling my tent. It was too deliberate to be an animal. It felt too close, too careful. The sound circled around my tent twice before stopping on the side where my head was. I felt my pulse pounding as I waited in the silence, every muscle tense. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the sound stopped. Minutes passed, and I didn't hear anything else. No movement, no breathing. I waited in my sleeping bag for what felt like hours, listening, waiting for any sign that it was still there. But the forest was completely silent. Eventually, fatigue won, and I fell into an uneasy sleep. When dawn broke, I unzipped my tent and looked around. The ground was wet from morning dew, but I could see marks in the dirt, large, heavy boot prints. They circled my tent in a perfect, eerie loop, right where I'd heard the footsteps. Whoever or whatever had been there hadn't just walked by. They had walked all the way around my tent, slowly, then left without a trace. I packed up quickly, not bothering to eat breakfast, my eyes darting to every shadow and every tree as I made my way back to the main trail. The marks around my tent told me everything I needed to know. Someone had been out there, watching me, close enough to touch the thin fabric between us. I never saw them, never found out who it was, but it was enough to keep me from ever camping alone again. The trip started out peaceful enough. I'd been needing a break from the everyday routine, and camping seemed like the perfect way to clear my head. I chose a spot in a remote forest, a few miles off the main trail, where I'd camped once before. I felt comfortable there, familiar with the trails, the sounds of the woods, even the isolation. It was exactly what I needed. I hiked in with everything I needed, set up my tent near a small clearing, and spent the day wandering the trails. As evening approached, the woods grew quieter, and the temperature began to drop. I sat by my fire, warmed up some food, and watched the stars gradually brighten overhead. The silence felt heavy, but it was a good kind of silence, like the forest was settling in for the night. I decided to turn in early, knowing that the night would be long and cold. Sometime in the night, I woke up to the sound of crunching leaves. It wasn't loud, but distinct enough to snap me out of my half-sleep. I lay there, listening, telling myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon. The forest was full of sounds, after all, and I'd camped enough times to know not to jump at every little noise. But then the crunching grew louder, heavier, like something or someone was moving slowly around my campsite. My first thought was another camper, maybe lost or just curious. But that didn't sit right. I hadn't seen anyone for miles when I hiked in, and I'd chosen a spot well off any major trail. The footsteps circled my tent once, then again, and I could feel my pulse quicken. Lying there, I didn't want to make a sound, afraid whoever was out there would notice I was awake. I held my breath, trying to listen. Whoever it was, they were moving methodically, not like someone just wandering through. They were staying close to the tent, as if waiting for something. After what felt like forever, the sounds drifted further away, and I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. I felt tense, like every part of me was on high alert, but I forced myself to stay calm, telling myself that maybe it was just a hunter or a camper who'd gone a little too far from their sight. I convinced myself it was just an odd coincidence, and after a while, exhaustion took over, and I fell into an uneasy sleep. When morning came, I stepped out of the tent, half convinced I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I saw it, fresh footprints in the dirt around my tent. They weren't mine. They were large, and they clearly circled my tent, looping back on themselves in several tight circles, like someone had been watching me. The prints led off in the direction of the trail, then disappeared into the underbrush. I packed up quickly, not even stopping to make breakfast. I wanted to get out of there, to put distance between myself and whatever had been out there. As I hiked back, I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way I hadn't felt before. The woods felt different, no longer a place of peace, but something darker. Something that held secrets I wasn't meant to see. When I finally reached my car, I looked back at the trailhead, half expecting to see someone or something lurking there. But it was empty, just the silent trees standing guard. I climbed in, locked the doors, and drove off without looking back. Since that night, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, knows I was there. It wasn't a ghost or some monster, just another person. But sometimes the thought of who they might have been and why they were watching me feels scarier than anything I could have imagined. I haven't been camping alone since, and I don't think I ever will again. I remember it was just supposed to be a quiet weekend, a break from the noise of the city. A friend and I had planned a camping trip, but at the last minute he canceled. I decided to go alone, thinking some solitude would be good for me. I packed light, just the basics: a tent, sleeping bag, food, and a flashlight. The place I chose was off the beaten path, deep in the forest. It wasn't a spot frequented by many campers, and that's exactly what I wanted. A place far from the usual trails, where I could be alone with my thoughts. The hike in was peaceful, just me and the sounds of the forest. I found a nice, secluded spot by a creek and set up camp. As evening crept in, the air got colder, and the forest grew quieter, but I didn't mind. I was used to camping, comfortable with the woods, even at night. As darkness fully settled, I built a small fire and cooked a simple meal. The stars came out, and I sat there for a while, watching the flames dance, feeling the cool night air on my skin. The silence around me was thick, almost heavy, but that's how it is in the deep woods. No distant hum of traffic, no voices, just the quiet rustling of leaves. I turned in early, planning to hike further into the woods the next day. Sometime during the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was a sound, maybe just a feeling, but something was off. Lying there, I listened, straining to hear anything beyond the usual noises. After a few moments, I heard it, a faint rustling, something moving around my campsite. My first thought was a raccoon or some other small animal, so I stayed still, hoping it would pass. But the rustling grew closer, heavier, more deliberate. This wasn't the sound of a small animal. I held my breath, barely moving, and then I heard something that made my blood go cold. Soft, steady footsteps. Someone or something was walking around my tent. I felt a surge of panic, but I fought it down, telling myself it was just another camper, maybe lost or curious. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. I was miles off the main trails, and no one knew I was here. I waited, lying still, heart pounding so loud I thought whoever was outside could hear it. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent, and I could see a faint shadow moving. They stood there, barely moving, for what felt like an eternity. Then, as silently as they had come, the footsteps moved away, fading into the distance until everything was quiet again. I lay there, wide awake, every sound in the forest amplified in my mind. I didn't dare move, didn't even reach for my flashlight. I just lay there, listening, waiting, until eventually exhaustion took over, and I fell into a light, uneasy sleep. When the first light of dawn crept through my tent, I sat up, my body tense and sore from the night's events. I unzipped the tent cautiously, peering outside, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one. The only evidence of the night was a strange set of boot prints circling my tent, deep and deliberate in the dirt. They weren't mine, and they led off into the woods, disappearing into the thick brush. I didn't waste time packing up. I was shaken, more than I wanted to admit, and the quiet solitude of the woods no longer felt peaceful. I headed back to the trail, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, feeling eyes on me even though I was alone. When I finally reached my car, the relief was overwhelming. As I drove away, I thought about those footprints, the way they circled my tent, stopping just inches from where I lay inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, not out of curiosity, but something darker. I never found out who or what it was, but that was the last time I went camping alone. I had been looking forward to this camping trip for weeks. Just me, the stars, and the quiet of the woods. I arrived at the campsite in the early evening, setting up my tent near a small lake surrounded by tall pines. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink. I built a fire, roasted some marshmallows, and enjoyed the peaceful sounds of nature. As darkness fell, the woods transformed. The rustling of leaves and the distant hoots of owls became more pronounced. I sat by the fire, listening to the crackling flames and watching the shadows dance on the trees. It felt like I was the only person in the world. After a while, I decided to go for a short walk around the lake. The moonlight shimmered on the water, making it look almost magical. I felt calm and relaxed, but soon, a strange feeling crept over me. The woods were eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination. I returned to my campsite, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I tucked myself into my sleeping bag, trying to focus on the sound of the fire crackling outside. Just as I began to drift off, I heard a noise. It was faint, like a twig snapping. I sat up, heart racing, listening closely. Then silence. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a raccoon, and tried to sleep again. But then the noise came again. This time it was louder, closer. I held my breath, straining to hear. It was followed by a low, muffled sound that sent chills down my spine. I felt a sudden rush of fear. I knew I had to see what it was. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air was cold and still. I pointed the beam of light into the darkness, scanning the area around my tent. Nothing, just the trees swaying gently in the wind. But then, I saw something move near the edge of the woods. My heart raced. It was too big to be an animal, but too far away to see clearly. I felt panic rising inside me. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Then, a loud crash came from the direction of the movement. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. My instincts kicked in, and I bolted back to the tent, zipping it shut tightly behind me. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, listening to the sounds outside. The noises faded, but I could still hear the occasional rustle in the trees. I felt trapped, waiting for dawn. Finally, the first light of morning peeked through the tent. Exhausted but relieved, I unzipped the door and stepped outside. The campsite was untouched. My fire had burned out, and the lake was calm. But as I looked around, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A large set of footprints led from the edge of the woods right to my tent. They were too big to belong to a bear and looked like a man's. I quickly packed up my gear, my hands shaking. I didn't want to stick around to find out who or what had been watching me. As I drove away, I glanced back at the woods. They looked peaceful again, but I knew the truth. I had escaped, but I would never forget the fear I felt that night. From that day on, I promised myself to never camp alone again. I should have never agreed to this camping trip. The idea of being out in the middle of nowhere, away from my phone signal, was something I joked about with friends before, but actually being here was different. We were deep in the woods, far from any town, and the only signs of civilization were our tents and a few barely visible paths we'd followed to get here. The night was dark, darker than I'd ever seen. We didn't have the comfort of streetlights, just the weak glow of our campfire and some dim, fading flashlights. Around us, the trees were thick, their twisted branches casting strange shadows that seemed to dance along with the flickering light. Every so often, I'd hear a twig snap in the distance, but I told myself it was just an animal. Still, the hair on the back of my neck prickled with every sound. It was when the fire started to die down that I began to feel really uneasy. I was tired and cold, so I crawled into my tent, zipping it shut and pulling my sleeping bag over me. The air felt damp, and everything outside was silent now, almost too quiet. I couldn't help but feel like something was off. Just as I was finally dozing off, I heard what sounded like footsteps outside. They were slow and deliberate, crunching against the dried leaves on the forest floor. At first, I told myself it was just one of my friends, maybe needing to use the bathroom or stretch their legs. But the footsteps didn't sound like they were moving in any particular direction. Instead, it was as if someone was circling around the tents, moving closer and then farther, pacing in a way that felt wrong. Lying there, holding my breath, I listened intently. The footsteps stopped, and a new sound replaced them. The unmistakable creak of fabric, like someone's hand pressing against the tent wall. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Whoever or whatever was out there, I could feel their presence right by my head, separated only by the thin layer of nylon. My mind raced through every possibility. An animal? Another camper lost and wandering? But neither felt right. The weight of that hand lingered, pressing against the tent, and then slowly, it slid away. After a few minutes of dead silence, I decided I had to know what was going on. I unzipped my sleeping bag as quietly as I could, clutching my flashlight, my hand shaking as I aimed it toward the zipper of the tent. My plan was simple: peek out quickly, confirm that it was nothing, and then go back to pretending I was asleep. But when I looked outside, there was nothing. No animals, no campers, nothing that would explain the sounds. Just the thick, dark forest staring back at me. I closed the tent, trying to convince myself that I'd imagined it. Maybe just the combination of exhaustion and nerves. The next morning, we were all up early, packing our things to head back to the car. I didn't mention what had happened, assuming it was a personal nightmare or some strange hallucination from the night before. But as I rolled up my tent, I noticed something on the side where I'd heard that pressing sound. A streak of mud, smeared like a handprint, right where my head had been. It was clear and deliberate, just one large hand, unmistakably human. I didn't say a word, just hurried to finish packing. Whatever had been out there, it was gone now. But as we walked back along that narrow, twisting path, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd narrowly avoided something that we'd never quite understand.